When darkness learned to speak, long before scripts and alphabets carved their authority into clay and stone, long before kings declared edicts or temples recorded the names of gods, there was only night. A night deeper than the one we know, untamed, unlit, and immense. In that ancient darkness, our earliest ancestors gathered around small trembling fires, each flame no larger than a cupped hand. And it was there, in the flicker and hum of those first flames, that secrecy was born. Archaeologists often mark this era, roughly 70,000 to 40,000 years ago, the Late Stone Age, when symbolic behavior began taking shape. But symbols didn't emerge suddenly. They grew like shadows lengthening at dusk. A carved talisman found in a South African cave, dated to about 75,000 years ago, carries geometric scratches that archaeologists interpret as deliberate, possibly ritual. But some fringe theorists like to imagine it as a coded language, a whisper from a mind trying to speak across tens of millennia. Scholars still debate whether these marks represent art, memory, or something far more esoteric. Picture them, small groups huddled against the wind, the smell of wood smoke stinging their eyes, the crackle of fire masking the growls of distant predators. These were nights where imagination served not as entertainment, but as survival. Every rustle on the plains carried consequence. Every star overhead hinted at silent, unblinking watchers. And when lightning would split the sky, turning night into a brief blaze of blue-white day, they must have believed a door had opened just for a moment into something larger and unknowable. It is here, at these fires, that the earliest forbidden knowledge blooms, not in the sense of spellbooks or covens, but in the much older language of symbols, fears, and interpretations. As the fire throws shapes onto cave walls, a figure steps forward, an elder, perhaps a hunter long past his prime, or a woman known for her dreams that seem to foretell storms. She leans into the firelight and begins to speak in low tones. Her words are not commands, they are bridges. She describes the shape of the world, the meanings of shadows, the behavior of spirits seen and unseen, and the children listen, not because they understand, but because they recognize the gravity of secrets. Among these early communities, knowledge was power, not political power, but power over uncertainty. Those who could read the sky, who remembered the migrations of animals, who sensed the change in seasons before the winds shifted, these individuals became the custodians of hidden understanding. Their wisdom was shared sparingly, reserved for those who proved themselves ready to hold it, for even then, too much knowledge could become a burden. Anthropologists studying existing hunter-gatherer cultures note a recurring pattern. Specialized individuals, sometimes shamans, sometimes elders, carry ritual knowledge that is not openly shared with the group. It is restricted, guarded, passed down in fragments. This, many believe, mirrors the structure of early symbolic societies. But some fringe writers go further, suggesting a global pattern of secret initiatory practices stretching back to these Paleolithic beginnings. Scholars still debate whether this continuity is real or simply a projection of modern imagination onto ancient lives. In northern Spain, in the deep chambers of El Castillo Cave, there are hand stencils, pale silhouettes surrounded by red pigment dating back more than 37,000 years. The way they appear, floating like ghosts on the uneven rock, suggests something more than mere decoration. One fringe interpretation proposes they were used in ceremonies where initiates would place their hands over the prints, symbolically merging with their ancestors. A mainstream view, however, holds that they were simple markings of presence, the earliest signatures known to humanity. Whether they carried ritual weight or not, the debate continues. And then there is the fire itself. Every night, in every encampment, flames cast visions onto the rough surfaces of caves and boulders. The flickering patterns could make animals appear to move, spirits to emerge, entire worlds to bloom from stone. This interplay of shadow and imagination is ancient, older than agriculture, older than cities, older than all recorded myth. It is here we find the roots of the forbidden, knowledge that is not universal, but selective, experiential, encoded in memory and story, rather than clay or script. As these small groups migrated across Africa, into the Middle East, across Asia and Europe, they carried their rituals with them, evolving them with each new encounter. What began as simple survival lore slowly became layered with cosmology. Why do seasons change? Why do people die? Why does the moon shrink and grow? Answers had to be crafted, and often those who crafted them did so with the gravitas of mystery. One nighttime ritual discovered among artifacts from the Czech Republic, dated around 30,000 years old, involves carved figurines placed near fire pits in deliberate arrangement. Whether these were offerings, teaching aids, or dramatized stories remains unknown, but their placement suggests intention, and intention is the foundation of ritual. Curiously, the earliest evidence of music flutes carved from bird bone also dates to around this time. Imagine the eerie notes rising in a dim cave, echoing off stone, weaving through firelight. Sound becomes spell-like in the right environment. It transforms space. It bends time. Scholars still debate whether music originated as entertainment, expression, or ritual technology designed to alter mental states. In this sense, the first forbidden secrets weren't spells but experiences, emotional, collective, transformative moments shared in darkness. They were not meant for outsiders because outsiders would not understand them. They were meant for the initiated, for those who had sat through enough nights, seen enough storms, lost enough companions, and gained enough trust. One might wonder, were these early rituals dangerous? Perhaps not in the supernatural sense, but in the deeply human one. To speak of spirits could spark fear. To assign meaning to storms could influence decisions about migration, hunting, and survival. Knowledge became a responsibility, and with it came the need for boundaries. Thus, secrecy evolved naturally not from malice, but from necessity. Of course, many modern writers romanticize this era as a golden age of primal mysticism, but the reality was likely more nuanced. These early communities lived on the edge of existence. Their rituals helped them cope with fear, loss, and the incomprehensible forces of nature. Yet the seeds planted in this era, secrecy, ritual, initiation, would blossom across every civilization that followed. Tonight, as we step deeper into their world, we leave behind the modern notion of occult as a set of fixed teachings. Instead, we enter a realm where knowledge is fluid, shared around firelight, protected by memory, and carried forward by the voices of those trusted enough to speak when darkness learned to listen. The silent bone markers. Long before the great walls of Mesopotamia rose from clay, before Egyptian scribes inked their first symbols onto papyrus, humanity recorded its most intimate mysteries on something far humbler bone. Not written words, not full images, but marks. Small, deliberate, rhythmic cuts on the remains of animals and sometimes even humans. These markings, found across Africa, Europe, and parts of the Near East, are among the oldest surviving traces of meaning-making. And for reasons we may never fully understand, many of them feel intentionally hidden, as if meant only for those who knew how to read them. Archaeologists refer to such artifacts as bone tally sticks or notched bones, but that phrase hardly captures their aura. Consider the Ishango bone, discovered near Lake Edward in the Democratic Republic of Congo and dated to roughly 20,000 years ago. It carries 3 columns of etched lines, grouped in seemingly purposeful sequences. Mainstream scholars often interpret it as a lunar calendar or counting device. Yet others, noticing its curious numerical patterns, primes on one side, repeating sequences on another, suggest an early form of symbolic cosmology. Scholars still debate whether this bone was a tool, a teaching instrument, or a ritual object meant for a very select few. Imagine the scene in which such a bone might have been carved. Not chaotic daylight with people shouting and moving about, but a quieter moment, a dusk gathering, an elder choosing a smooth piece of bone, and a small circle of attentive listeners. The maker draws the blade with intent, creating grooves that catch the firelight in thin silver glints. These marks are not casual. They hold memory, they hold meaning, they hold the weight of an experience the maker does not wish to be forgotten or misused. There is a powerful human instinct to record what matters, and an equally powerful instinct to conceal what should not be shared lightly. These bone markers represent both. They embody the tension between revelation and secrecy, between knowledge passed on and knowledge guarded. In several Upper Paleolithic sites, such as Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic and Abry Blanchard in France, archaeologists have uncovered similar notched bones placed deliberately away from living areas. Some lie beside figurines or under carved stones, almost like offerings or parts of a teaching set. And near a hearth at Dolní Věstonice, researchers found a burned bone etched with repeating patterns, suggesting it may have been ritually disposed of after fulfilling its purpose. Scholars still debate whether the destruction of such objects marked the closing of a ceremony, the end of a season, or the safeguarding of knowledge by reducing the artifact to ash. Fringe interpretations, more imaginative than accepted, propose that some markings resemble proto-astrological systems, simple tracking of celestial events by early skywatchers. While mainstream archaeology prefers more cautious explanations, the idea carries a certain poetic plausibility. Even today, people track the moon with simple marks on paper. Why couldn't early humans do the same on bone? But numbers and calendars, if these objects truly represented them, were not merely functional. A calendar tells you when herds migrate, when rivers swell, when storms return. It tells you when to celebrate, when to mourn, when to perform rituals. Early timekeeping, in other words, held power, and with power comes secrecy. In some hunter-gatherer societies, specific knowledge such as the timing of rituals or the appearance of certain stars was traditionally kept within a small group, often a priestly class, a shamanic lineage, or a council of elders. Knowledge of time, in this context, becomes a marker of status. It shapes how people view the world and their place within it. It is not hard to imagine similar dynamics existing tens of thousands of years ago. Another intriguing site lies in Moravia, where archaeologists discovered a bone fragment carved with zigzag patterns thought to be symbolic rather than decorative. While some researchers attribute such designs to artistic expression, others suggest they served as mnemonic devices, memory aids for oral teachings. This idea has support. In societies without writing, storytellers often rely on objects etched with cues to guide long recitations. One can imagine an elder tracing these zigzags during a story about ancestors, spirits, or the cycles of seasons, teaching through gesture as much as through words. And yet, many of these bone markers were found in places suggesting restricted access. Some were buried under stones or hidden behind rock formations only reachable by crawling. At Abry Blanchard, one cache of carved bones was discovered behind a narrow cleft in the limestone, almost as if deliberately concealed. Scholars still debate whether this hiding served ceremonial, spiritual, or protective purposes. It raises a fascinating thought. Were these bones meant to be found only by members of a group who already understood the significance? Did these early societies use secrecy to preserve not only knowledge but identity? In a world without borders or written treaties, shared secrets could strengthen bonds, helping define who belonged and who did not. The silence of these objects is striking. Unlike cave paintings, which shout their meaning across walls in vivid scenes, bone markers whisper. Their message is compressed, encoded, requiring context that has long since vanished. They are like pages torn from books we can no longer read, surviving only because they were carved in durable material. And because they are silent, because they speak only through texture and repetition, they invite interpretation. They invite projection, They invite mystery. In the caves of southern France, a cluster of bone inscriptions was discovered near a set of hand stencils older than most writing systems. One bone, carved with parallel lines, seemed to be placed intentionally below a stencil, as if the two formed a paired ritual, the hand marking identity, the bone marking memory. This has led some fringe theorists to suggest the existence of early initiatory rites involving hand imprinting and symbolic bone carving. The mainstream community finds this speculative, but the alignment is hard to dismiss as coincidence. Even more curious are the bones found in Gough's Cave in England, dating back about 15,000 years. Among these fragments are marks that appear purposefully incised into human bones. Though the site shows clear evidence of ritualized cannibalism likely tied to funerary practice, the notches on certain bones may not be functional or nutritional. Instead, some researchers believe they were symbolic, perhaps marking lineage, achievement, or remembrance. Scholars still debate whether these marks represent ritual respect, taboo breaking, or something else entirely. This is the paradox of early occult knowledge. Everything feels both intimate and unreachable. We can hold the bones in our hands today, turn them under soft laboratory light, magnify the grooves, measure their depth, but we cannot hear the voices that made them. The silence around these objects is not emptiness but absence, a void where meaning once lived vividly. And yet the bones endure. They remain as artifacts of early attempts to capture what words alone could not express. They represent the moment when humans learned to externalize their minds, their fears, their observations, even their secrets. In these etched lines, we glimpse the beginnings of codification, the first moments when knowledge became something to preserve beyond the breath of the speaker. And perhaps, for the first time, something to guard. The fires have burned low now. The first storytellers have whispered their teachings. The bones have been marked, hidden, protected. And as we move forward into more complex societies, the secrecy born in these early shadows will grow, evolve, and fracture into new forms, temples, priesthoods, forbidden texts, and layers of meaning still waiting to be uncovered. Gatekeepers of the first symbols. Before cities rose and kingdoms formed, before priests donned robes or astronomers charted the heavens with copper tools, there existed a quieter revolution, one that unfolded across tens of millennia. It was the birth of symbols. Not pictures of animals or handprints on walls, but true symbols, shapes that meant something more than what they depicted, carrying invisible weight, invisible power. These were the marks that turned memory into tradition, tradition into ritual, and ritual into something guarded. Some of the earliest known symbols come from southern Africa, carved into ochre blocks at Blombos Cave roughly 70,000 years ago. A cross-hatched pattern, deliberate and symmetrical, etched with surprising finesse. Archaeologists interpret these as some of the first abstract designs, evidence that early humans were already exploring the world beyond the literal. But fringe theorists, noting the repetition of the pattern across different caves, speculate that these marks functioned as tribal identifiers or even proto-ritual sigils. Scholars still debate whether these motifs were decorative, mnemonic, or deeply sacred. To imagine the world in which these symbols were created is to imagine a landscape both familiar and alien. The wind carried the same scents, rain-soaked earth, crushed grass, distant smoke, but the human mind was just beginning to externalize its inner workings. Words existed, of course. Humans spoke long before they wrote. But symbols offered something words could not: durability. A symbol survived the speaker. It endured beyond the moment. And once the first communities realized this, a new problem emerged: who should control the symbols? Imagine a group gathered in a rock shelter, the walls warmed by firelight. The clan's elder, perhaps the only one who knows how to make the cross-hatched pattern correctly, steps forward. She takes an ochre piece in her hand, rubs it across the stone floor to flatten its edge, then draws the first diagonal stroke. Others watch. They know this symbol is not for everyone. It may mark a seasonal change, a familial bond, a rite of passage, but the technique, the method of making it, is not openly taught. Knowledge is becoming stratified. This is the birth of the gatekeepers. Every society, even the earliest nomadic ones, had individuals who specialized in tasks others could not do or would not do. Some made stone blades, some prepared pigments, some healed wounds, and some quietly, subtly handled symbols and rituals. In the Paleolithic settlement of Sungir in Russia, dating to around 34,000 years ago, archaeologists discovered burials adorned with tens of thousands of painstakingly carved beads. Each bead required hours of work, and their arrangement suggests intentional messaging, status, lineage, or spiritual significance. But one grave, belonging to a young boy, contains patterns unlike others. The beads form a design that seems coded, symbolic. Some researchers propose a ceremonial function. Fringe views suggest secret clan markings. Scholars still debate the meaning of these elaborate arrangements. One thing is clear, these patterns were not for everyone. They required training to create, and training implies structure. As the symbolic world grew, some groups likely recognized the need to protect it, not out of malice, but out of caution. Symbols could unify or divide, they could soothe or terrify. A single misinterpreted mark could disrupt a ritual, confuse a season, or threaten survival. Thus, knowledge flowed through chosen channels, elders, specialists, proto-shamans, people who became the custodians of memory. This pattern repeats across early human sites. In the cave sanctuary of Gabanmung in Australia, some rock art layers span over 28,000 years, showing consistent motifs painted by generations. While Aboriginal traditions evolved independently, the concept of certain symbols belonging only to initiated members resonates with universal human patterns. Among many indigenous groups today, sacred imagery can only be used or understood by those who have undergone specific rites. Scholars still debate whether Paleolithic communities held similarly structured initiations, but the parallels are tempting. Symbols, unlike stories, do not require sound. They can be hidden, revealed, or selectively displayed. Imagine a stone slab with a carved spiral tucked into the back of a shelter, visible only during certain ceremonies, perhaps lit by fire in a deliberate way. There is evidence of such practice in the caves of Trois Frères in France, where carvings sit in deep recesses, requiring careful lighting to reveal their details. Some fringe theorists propose these carvings were not meant to be seen by everyone but only during rituals, under specific conditions. Mainstream scholars hesitate, but the placement is undeniably intentional. The emergence of gatekeepers also changed how communities functioned. When knowledge becomes specialized, it becomes leverage. The one who knows the meaning of a symbol or how to create it holds influence. They decide when a ritual begins, when a season turns, when a myth is reenacted. In a world without writing, this influence is immense. Take the carnivore bone carvings discovered in Dolny Viestonis, small, detailed, possibly symbolic objects found near hearths associated with ritual spaces. Some are animal shapes, others are more abstract. What is striking is the craftsmanship consistent, skilled, repeated across generations. This suggests a lineage of artisans, perhaps even ritual artisans, passing down techniques privately. Scholars still debate whether these items served purely artistic, ceremonial, or mnemonic purposes. There are hints of secrecy scattered throughout these ancient contexts. Bones hidden in pits beneath dwellings, stones with etched marks placed in deep caves, pigment caches concealed behind rock formations. These behaviors align with a familiar pattern: restricted access, a hallmark of early esoteric culture. But the true power of symbols was not just in their creation, it was in their interpretation. Two groups could share the same mark, yet assign different meanings. A zigzag might represent water to one clan, danger to another, and a protective spirit to a third. Misinterpretation could lead to conflict or profound misunderstanding. Thus, those who understood the original meanings became arbiters of truth. Symbolic teaching likely occurred in slow, layered fashion. A young initiate might first learn the surface, meaning this mark represents rain. Years later, they discover the deeper meaning rain marks the time of migration. Still later, the hidden meaning migration is connected to a mythic event involving ancestors and spirits. And perhaps the deepest meaning of all, revealed only to a final few, that the pattern, when carved at a certain angle or with a certain number of strokes, forms part of a ritual sequence. All of this predates writing by tens of thousands of years. This long incubation allowed secrecy to root deeply in human culture. When writing finally emerged in Sumer around 3200 BCE, many of the earliest written symbols were already ancient. The idea of controlled knowledge of gatekeepers had existed for more than 50,000 years. By the time we reach the great civilizations, secrecy is no longer an accident, it is an institution. But before civilizations codify their mysteries, we must explore the next step, the sanctuaries, where symbols were not merely carved but lived, performed, and guarded with growing devotion. Rituals beneath the floodplains. When the first great rivers carved their wandering paths across ancient landscapes, they did more than nourish life, they shaped belief. Floodplains, with their shifting mud and sudden bounty, became places where early humans witnessed a rhythm of destruction and renewal so powerful it demanded interpretation. Long before the rise of Sumer, or the gardens of the Nile Delta, long before irrigation or organized priesthoods, the river valleys were already stages for ritual. And many of those rituals, perhaps out of necessity, occurred in secret. It begins with water. Water that arrives unbidden, rises without warning, and recedes in patterns only the most observant could predict. For communities living along prehistoric floodplains, from the ancient Nile corridor to the Indus slopes, from Mesopotamia's shallow marshlands to the early Danube basin, floods were both terrifying and divine. A flood could destroy a settlement overnight or replenish the soil for an entire season. It was a power no human could control, yet some tried to understand it through ritual. At the site of Kamyana Mohyla in Ukraine, a sandstone hill decorated with carved symbols more than 12,000 years old sits near an ancient watercourse. Among its chambers are engravings of fish, waves, spirals, and geometric patterns that seem to echo cycles of rising and falling water. Mainstream researchers classify the site as a sanctuary, possibly shamanic. Fringe theorists point to its elaborate water motifs and propose it was an early flood cult, a place where initiates recorded knowledge of seasonal inundation. Scholars still debate whether the carvings represent mythic stories, ritual calendars, or literal environmental records. Imagine a circle of individuals entering one of these stone chambers during the flood season. The river outside is swollen, churning, thick with silt. Clouds hang low, the scent of mud and ozone dense in the air. The group brings with them carved pebbles, each etched with repeating marks that resemble waves. At the center, a specialist, someone who's watched the river for decades, arranges the stones in patterns on the sandy floor. The meaning of the pattern is not spoken aloud. It doesn't need to be. All those gathered have been initiated into the ritual's logic. They know the river is both life bringer and life taker, and that understanding its rhythm is sacred. Scenes like this, though speculative in their details, align with archaeological evidence that certain communities reserved environmental knowledge for a select few. In early Australian floodplain societies, for instance known through ethnographic analogy but rooted in far older traditions, songlines related to water flow and wet season patterns were taught only to initiated members. This practice offers a modern echo of how knowledge tied to survival could become sacred and restricted. While these analogies are not perfect reflections of the Paleolithic, they help frame a world where nature's unpredictability required guardianship. One of the oldest known ritual sites related to water sits near the ancient Nile floodplain at Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, dated to around 6000 BCE. Though much younger than Paleolithic cultures, it preserves a pattern that likely began far earlier. Stone circles aligning with seasonal rainfall and astronomical markers. There is evidence of cattle cults, ceremonial hearths, and carved stones arranged with geometric precision. Some researchers believe only a special group understood the site's full significance, including its connection to the monsoon patterns that governed life in the Sahara at the time. Scholars still debate whether Nabta Playa's astronomer priests were the heirs of even older flood watchers. Flood rituals required secrecy for practical reasons as well. If only a few understood the signs of rising water, how the wind shifts, how certain birds migrate, how the river changes color, they gained influence over communal decision-making. This was not secrecy for power's sake alone, it was a mechanism for order. Too many interpretations could lead to chaos, one group moving to higher ground while others stayed, disputes erupting over timing, resources drained by unnecessary relocations. Better to centralize such knowledge. In Mesopotamia's early floodplain settlements, long before writing emerged, archaeologists have found clay tokens, some crescent-shaped, others circular, marked with dots dating back more than 9,000 years. Mainstream scholarship ties these tokens to early accounting systems. But several were discovered in contexts suggesting ritual purpose, buried beneath floors, grouped near hearths, or placed beside animal bones. Fringe theorists argue these tokens might represent early attempts to track not just trade, but cycles' lunar phases, water levels, or flood predictions. Scholars still debate whether ritual and accounting overlapped more than we assume. Water is a powerful teacher, and the first flood watchers learned that its cycles were not random. They observed how snowmelt far upstream could signal rising waters months later, how certain winds carried rains from distant regions, how the angle of the sun marked the arrival of the wet season. These insights were subtle and required long-term memory, something early humans preserved through story and ceremony. Picture a ritual enacted beside a swollen riverbank. The participants sit in a semicircle as the elder draws lines in the wet earth, mimicking the river's course. Each line corresponds to a stage in the flood, but only the initiates know the full interpretation. Certain bends in the line represent places where spirits dwell, others mark ancestral crossings, others still denote caution. To outsiders, the drawing seems like simple doodling. To insiders, it is a coded map of survival. In some regions, rituals involved offerings to river spirits. Archaeologists working in the Iron Gates region along the Danube have found evidence of animal sacrifices placed intentionally near riverine burials, perhaps gifts to appease forces controlling the water. Although this site dates later, the logic is much older. Where water governs life, water demands respect. Of particular interest is a site near the ancient Ebro River in Spain, where carved stones with wave-like engravings were found buried under layers of sediment deliberately placed, then sealed by time and flood. Some stones appear worn from handling, suggesting they were part of repeated, possibly secret ceremonies before being laid to rest. Scholars still debate whether the act of burial symbolized a ritual ending, a plea to stop the floods, or an offering to ensure their return. The secrecy around flood rituals may also have emerged from a deeper psychological need to impose narrative onto chaos. When waters rose unpredictably, communities sought explanations. The flood is angry, some might say. The spirits are restless, or the ancestors demand remembering. In this moment, myth arises not merely as story, but as structure, a framework to process unpredictability, and those who shape the myth, who interpret signs and predict outcomes, become essential. One fringe narrative, popularized in the 20th century but lacking strong evidence, imagines an ancient class of flood priests traveling between river valleys, teaching shared knowledge. This idea is romantic but unsubstantiated. What is true, however, is that similar patterns of flood-related ritual appear independently in cultures separated by vast distances. Scholars still debate whether this reflects universal human response or ancient cultural contact. What we can say with confidence is this: beneath the mud and shifting waters of prehistoric floodplains, early humans learned to treat nature's power as something to understand, honor, and sometimes fear. Rituals emerged, not from superstition, but from the need to navigate uncertainty, to mark thresholds between life and death, scarcity and abundance, land and water. And it is here, in these humble floodplain ceremonies, that secrecy finds new purpose. It becomes not just protection of knowledge, but protection of identity. The watchers of water become anointed. Their insights become sacred. Their rituals become tradition. Our journey now moves from riverbanks to stones toward the great monuments and sanctuaries where secrecy transforms from practical to cosmic, and symbols take on a scale that will echo for millennia. The stone that listened. Long before the first megalithic circles rose in full grandeur before Stonehenge, before Göbekli Tepe, there were solitary stones, upright slabs placed not for shelter, not for boundary marking, but for listening. These early monoliths, scattered across prehistoric landscapes, stand like frozen witnesses to rituals carried out long before agriculture reshaped the human world. They were not altars in the traditional sense. They were instruments, silent, immovable tools used to commune with forces humans sensed but could not name. Archaeologists studying some of the oldest standing stones, from Namibia's Twyfelfontein engravings to the remote monoliths of the Arabian Peninsula, have noted a curious pattern. Many stones are positioned in locations where sound behaves strangely. A whisper spoken near one face carries in unexpected directions. A drumbeat echoes longer than it should. Even today, at sites like the megaliths of Karnak in France, far younger, around 6,000 years old, researchers notice acoustic hotspots, places where sound gathers or disperses with uncanny precision. Scholars still debate whether this is intentional engineering or natural accident, but the consistency is difficult to ignore. Imagine a time around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. A group approaches a lone, upright stone at dawn. Their feet sink softly into dew-heavy grass, and the horizon glows faintly with the first hint of sun. One elder steps forward and places her palm on the cold surface. To her, the stone is not inert, it hums. Not in a literal sense, but in the way a mountain hums when wind slides along its flanks. The stone holds memory. It has stood through storms, witnessed migrations, felt the tremors of distant quakes. It is, in their eyes, a being, a listener. At Göbekli Tepe, in southeastern Turkey, dating back at least 11,000 years, archaeologists uncovered T-shaped pillars, carved with animals, abstract symbols, and human-like features. But beyond the carvings is something subtler. Many pillars form enclosures where acoustics behave in intentional, seeming ways. Sound in some chambers amplifies, in others it becomes strangely muffled. Experiments show that even a low chant resonates strongly within these spaces. Fringe theorists claim the builders intentionally shaped these effects. Mainstream scholars are cautious, though they acknowledge the acoustic qualities are non-trivial. Scholars still debate whether Göbekli Tepe's pillars were arranged partly to manipulate sound. It is tempting to imagine rituals where humming, chanting, or rhythmic speech echoed off stone faces, altering emotional states. Such sonic environments are known to induce trance-like experiences in many cultures. If these early gatherings sought connection with unseen forces, sound and the stone's response would have been powerful tools. Consider the concept of a listening stone. Anthropologists working with indigenous cultures in southern Africa describe certain stones believed to hear prayers or absorb intentions. People whisper into cracks, believing the stone carries the message deeper into the earth. Similar traditions appear in parts of northern Europe, where cup-marked stones were thought to drink offerings. Could such beliefs originate in much older experiences with sound-reactive monoliths? One striking example exists in Portugal at the Anta da Orca, where tapping one stone produces a ringing tone like a bell. Although this site is Neolithic, younger than our era of interest, the idea that stones could produce sound may have roots in Paleolithic experimentation. Early humans were highly observant. They listened to echoes in caves, noticed resonance in hollows, and recognized how certain rocks produced sharper sounds when struck. In some places, long before formal stone structures, humans carved markings into ringing stones purely for the sound they made. Picture a ritual taking place at twilight. A row of initiates kneel before an upright monolith. Their leader taps the stone with a rounded pebble once, twice, 3 times. Each strike resonates, vibrating faintly through the earth beneath them. To the uninitiated, this is meaningless noise. To those within the circle, it is a signal. The ritual begins. There is evidence of marked stones in northern Spain from the Magdalenian era, around 17,000 years ago, whose surfaces bear patterned depressions. Some researchers think these were created not for imagery, but for sound percussion marks carved, where striking the stone produced different tones. Scholars still debate whether these were early musical instruments or ritual devices. But the pattern fits a broader theme. Early humans experimenting with stone not as canvas, but as collaborator. Secrecy emerges naturally in such environments. If sound was used to induce trance, to tell stories, or to mark transitions between life stages, the techniques would not be shared casually. A misplaced chant or incorrect rhythm might spoil the ritual or weaken its effect. Thus, the guardians of these practices, the first acoustic specialists, held privileged knowledge. At times, secrecy was reinforced by geography. Many solitary stones stand in liminal spaces, places between zones of life, near cliffs, at the edges of ancient forests, overlooking river valleys. These locations were not chosen for convenience. Liminal spaces often carry symbolic significance, boundaries between worlds. People journeyed to the stone rather than bringing it to the settlement. The journey itself became part of the initiation. But not all stones were solitary. Some formed pairs or small clusters, suggesting cooperative function. 2 stones placed at a particular distance might echo each other's vibrations. Some pairs align with notable landscape features, like a notch in the mountains where the solstice sun rises, or a distant waterfall whose sound harmonizes with the stone's position. At sites in Scandinavia, archaeologists discovered stones positioned so that sunlight illuminates hidden carvings only during certain times of year. While these are later constructions, they hint at a tradition stretching deep into prehistory, stones as mediators of nature's messages. There is a fringe but persistent idea that some stones were believed to store sound, an almost mystical version of acoustic memory. The notion is symbolic, of course, but it captures an ancient intuition. Stones endure. They hold stories. They remain long after the speakers vanish. So a whispered prayer or chant feels as if it embeds itself into the material. This sense of longevity may have contributed to the idea that stones could bear witness. Some ancient communities may have believed the stones judged them, that improper rituals or broken oaths could be heard by the monolith. This concept appears later in Celtic and Anatolian traditions, but could originate far earlier. Scholars still debate whether such beliefs reflect continuity or independent invention. One archaeological curiosity adds fuel to such speculation. At a site near Lake Onega in Russia, petroglyphs carved onto exposed stone surfaces appear disproportionately in places where echoes are unusually strong. A single shout bounces back with surprising clarity. Was this coincidence, or were these surfaces chosen precisely because the stone responded creating a sense of presence in the natural world. The idea of stone as companion, witness, and participant permeates early ritual landscapes. It softens the boundary between natural and supernatural. A stone that reflects sound seems alive. A stone that marks solstices seems intelligent. A stone that stands unmoved through storms seems eternal. It is within this atmosphere, raw, elemental, resonant, that secrecy deepens. The elders who understood the stone's behavior, who knew where to stand, when to tap, where to whisper, became the earliest ritual technicians. Their expertise could not be written down. It had to be learned through presence, through experience, through nights spent listening to the wind scrape the monolith's edge. As we move onward, these solitary stones give way to something grander: circles, chambers, sanctuaries, places where stone is shaped into architecture, where secrecy becomes structured, and where rituals move from the open landscape into bounded, consecrated spaces. But everything begins with a single listening stone, humming faintly in the dawn, at the edge of the red dawn. Long before deserts hardened into the shapes we know today, long before caravans stretched across the dunes or cities rose from oases, there were nomads. Small groups moving across semi-arid plains, following the uncertain pulse of the land. These were landscapes of red dust and thinning grass, where mornings began with a copper-colored glow and ended with wind-scraped horizons. Here, in these in-between territories, a unique class of ritual specialists emerged: dreamkeepers, horizon watchers, and wanderers who claimed to read the world not through stone or carved symbol, but through movement. The Red Dawn Zone, as some archaeologists poetically call it, refers not to a single region, but to a recurring environment, ecotones between savanna and desert stretching across ancient North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, and parts of Central Asia. These were borderlands of scarcity, where the earliest atmospheric changes ushered in cycles of drought. Survival required acute observation of wind, light, and dreams. Yes, dreams. For among these nomadic bands, dreams were not private, personal experiences. They were messages, and those who interpreted them shaped the choices of the entire group. The evidence for this is subtle but compelling. At the Paleolithic site of Jebel Sahaba, near the Nile's second cataract, burial patterns dating back around 13,000 years suggest that certain individuals laid in unusual postures or adorned with pigment held revered, possibly ritual roles. Their graves differ not just in decoration, but in placement, often positioned toward the direction of dawn. Mainstream scholars interpret this as symbolic orientation or pedigree. Fringe writers argue these were early dream watchers, individuals believed to communicate with spirits through visions. Scholars still debate whether such differentiation implies shamanic hierarchy, but the positioning towards sunrise is notable. Picture a small group standing on a ridge at dawn. The sky bleeds into shades of rose and amber, and the longest shadows stretch behind them. One figure stands slightly apart, someone older, wrapped in dust-worn leather, their hair braided with small tokens. As the sun rises, they lift a staff or carved bone and watch how the light breaks over distant hills. To the uninitiated, it is simple observation. But to the group, this ritual marks the beginning of the day's omen reading. Nomadic ritual differed sharply from the more fixed traditions of cave dwellers or river cults. These people could not carve symbols into stone and expect them to remain. They could not build shrines or store engraved bones in hidden chambers. Their sacred landscape was always moving. Thus, secrets traveled in memory, in voice, in gesture, and in dreams. Knowledge was portable, alive, mutable, and the ones who carried that knowledge did so through an internal library. Among modern nomadic cultures such as the Tuareg, San, or Siberian Evenki, ritual specialists often derive their legitimacy from dreams. Dreams are considered not only personal journeys but communal messages. While we cannot directly map these systems onto the Paleolithic, they give us a lens, dreams as ritual territory, where symbols are not carved but experienced. Scholars still debate whether early nomads held structured dream rituals, but archaeological hints support the possibility. In the hills of Wadi al-Ajal in Libya, engravings dating back many thousands of years depict figures with elongated limbs surrounded by swirling lines. While mainstream researchers consider them symbolic depictions of dancers or spirits, some fringe interpretations propose these lines represent dream trails paths taken in trance states. Regardless of the interpretation, the imagery suggests a belief in journeys beyond the physical. These dream journeys required guides, and those guides became the guardians of knowledge that others feared or misunderstood. A curious pattern emerges in several burial sites across northern Sudan and eastern Chad. Certain graves contain unusual objects, smooth stones worn from handling, beads carved from ostrich eggshell, or talons of predatory birds. These were not everyday adornments. Some anthropologists propose they symbolize the ability to see or travel in ritual. Bird talons especially point toward flight, an age-old metaphor for spiritual ascent. Fringe theorists, noting repetition across sites, argue these objects may mark an early class of trance-migrators or dreamwalkers. Scholars still debate whether the objects bear ritual meaning or simple preference. But what makes this group especially intriguing is how their rituals revolved around movement itself. While cave cultures relied on stable sanctuaries, nomads found sacred power in transit. They believed that certain knowledge could only be revealed at the threshold between night and day, at the edge of the red dawn when the world was neither dark nor bright, neither safe nor dangerous. This liminality is a key feature of ancient ritual across countless cultures. Here, in these red morning hours, early nomadic ritual specialists read the world like a shifting script. Consider the wind-reading traditions. Archaeologists studying ancient desert paths in the Arabian Peninsula found clusters of stones arranged in deliberate patterns, often lining narrow corridors between dune fields. These kites, though mostly used for hunting, sometimes align with consistent wind directions. Some researchers argue the alignments may have also served ceremonial purposes, guiding nomads during dangerous seasons or marking locations where ritual gatherings occurred. Fringe authors embellish this into complex navigational cults. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, but acknowledge the spatial patterning is intentional. Scholars still debate whether these arrangements had ritual or purely functional roles. One ritual, hinted at in a site near the ancient Lake Megachad Basin, may have involved lying on the ground just before sunrise, ears pressed to the earth. Vibrations from distant animal herds or shifting sands would be interpreted as omens. This practice appears in ethnographic accounts of several pastoral cultures, though its Paleolithic origins remain uncertain. Here, secrecy emerges not from architecture or written codes, but from experience. A dream watcher might instruct a novice to sleep facing a certain direction, or to avoid looking at the horizon under a waxing moon. The reasons are never fully explained. Understanding must come through lived experience, not lecture. As in many shamanic traditions, explanation diminishes power, mystery preserves it. Among the earliest forms of symbolic authority, the dreamkeeper held a unique place. Cave painters could encode meaning in stone. Flood priests could track water cycles. But dream specialists possessed a knowledge that existed nowhere outside their minds. It could not be stolen, only learned. This made them indispensable and enigmatic. The landscape around them reinforced secrecy. The red dawn light, diffused through dust and low clouds, distorts shapes and silhouettes. A distant figure becomes a spirit, a ridge becomes a serpent. A herd of antelope becomes a single, shifting organism. These illusions were not mistakes, they were insights. They taught early humans how easily perception could shape belief, and belief could shape action. Imagine an initiate walking alone at dawn, tasked with observing the color of the sky, the song of a distant bird, the quality of the wind. Only after returning does the dream watcher interpret the signs, weaving the initiate's observations into a ritual framework. In this way, knowledge becomes personalized, layered, and protected. By the time agriculture emerged and societies settled, many traditions of the Red Dawn wanderers faded or transformed. But traces remained in myths of horizon spirits, in rituals performed at dawn, in the belief that dreams carry messages from ancestors or gods. These ideas did not begin in temples or cities. They began here, in the dust-colored world between night and day. And now, leaving the mobile rituals of the nomads behind, we step toward something more stationary yet equally uncanny. Sanctuaries built not for movement but for mystery, where the walls themselves teach secrets hidden from all but the chosen few. The oracle in the rainstorm. Long before grand temples rose on mountaintops, before priestesses chanted in marble sanctuaries, there existed oracles of a simpler, stranger kind born not from architecture, but from weather. Among the earliest humans, rain was more than water. It was a presence, a force that arrived with sound, with scent, with violence and gentleness in alternating measure. And in certain ancient landscapes especially, where dry seasons stretched bitterly long, the sudden arrival of rain felt like a message from forces unseen. It was here that the first weather oracles emerged, individuals who could hear meaning in thunder, who could interpret the voice of a storm. We begin in the highlands of East Africa around 10,000 years ago, where rock shelters once echoed with the sound of seasonal storms. Archaeological excavations at sites like Lucania Hill reveal clusters of enigmatic engravings, spirals, arcs, branching lines that some researchers interpret as rainfall records. While mainstream scholars emphasize environmental tracking, a few fringe theorists propose these engravings held ritual significance, marking places where storm interpretations were performed. Scholars still debate whether such markings were practical calendars or ceremonial scripts. Picture a gathering at the mouth of a rock shelter. Clouds roll across the plateau, heavy and bruised with rain. A small group waits, faces lifted to the sky. And standing apart is the oracle, a figure wrapped in skins, their hair braided with small charms made of bone and seed pods. They carry no staff, no carved symbol, but instead hold a smooth stone shaped by years of tumbling in riverbeds. The stone glistens as the first drops fall. For them, this is not simply weather. It is a ritual moment. The oracle lifts the stone to their ear, not because the stone speaks, but because the rain striking its surface creates a pattern of sound. To the trained ear, that pattern conveys meaning, the tempo, the rhythm, the angle of impact. These subtle distinctions matter. They guide decisions about travel, hunting, or shelter. They may even inspire mythic interpretations, messages from ancestors or spirits. While this may sound fantastical to us, researchers studying indigenous rain rituals in parts of Tanzania and Kenya note similar practices today, where specialists interpret lightning direction or thunder cadence to decide when rituals should occur. Now imagine a ritual at the height of a storm. The oracle positions themselves near a cliff face. Rain pounds the rock, producing echoes that bounce across the valley. Initiates sit in a semicircle, listening not to the storm itself but to the oracle's breathing, their subtle gestures, the way they tilt their head. Every movement becomes part of the ritual language. The storm is the script, the oracle is the reader. One of the earliest hints of sound-based weather rituals comes from the Tafaralt cave complex in Morocco, where shells dyed with red ochre, possibly used in ceremonies, were found near hearths associated with seasonally timed gatherings. While the site dates back more than 14,000 years, its connection to rainfall remains debated. Some scholars believe these gatherings occurred during wet periods when vegetation flourished. Fringe theorists suggest the environment itself shaped ritual, making the appearance of rain a signal for communal rites. Scholars still debate whether weather cycles directly influenced ceremonial timing. It is in this atmosphere that secrecy naturally grows. Storm interpretation is neither intuitive nor easily taught. It requires long observation, watching cloud formations for decades, listening to distant thunder, sensing subtle atmospheric shifts. The expertise becomes rare, and rarity breeds exclusivity. Thus, the oracles of rain became gatekeepers of knowledge others feared to misunderstand. In some nomadic groups of the ancient Sahel, as evidenced by grave goods and oral tradition, rain-related objects, horns polished to gleam, stones shaped by water, shells carried from distant coasts were buried with certain individuals, but not others. These individuals often show unusual burial orientations, some facing directly toward regions where seasonal storms originated. Scholars still debate whether this indicates a ritual specialization, but the pattern is striking. Then there are the curious storm pits, small depressions found in clusters near prehistoric camps in the Arabian Peninsula. Some researchers propose they were used as wind monitors, others argue they collected rain for ritual purification. But a more fringe idea suggests they amplified the sound of falling rain, creating a rhythmic drumming effect. When rain hit these pits, it may have produced a controlled acoustic experience, one that could be used to induce trance. While speculative, experiments with similar pits in modern settings show surprising acoustic properties. Imagine an oracle seated beside one such pit. Rain falls into it with sharp, resonant splashes. The sound is hypnotic. The initiates around the pit sway gently, guided not by the oracle's words but by a rhythm they believe to be the sky's own heartbeat. In such moments, the oracle's role shifts from interpreter to conductor, orchestrating experience without ever raising their voice. At times, secrecy served practical purposes. Weather prediction meant survival. If outsiders learned storm signs, they might compete for water, for grazing land, for shelter. Thus, storm rites became guarded traditions. Even within the group, only a few were trained. Initiation likely involved exposure, literally. Some anthropologists studying rain cults in Madagascar note that initiates must sit in storms for extended periods, learning to distinguish rainfall intensities by sound alone. Paleolithic versions of such rites may have existed, though we lack direct evidence beyond analogies and burial patterns. There is also the psychological dimension. Storms evoke awe today. Imagine their impact on humans with no meteorological knowledge. Lightning splitting the sky, thunder shaking the ground, these were experiences that demanded explanation, and the oracle provided that explanation, often in poetic, symbolic terms. Not science, but narrative. Not forecast, but interpretation, a framework to make sense of nature's violence. Over time, some oracles became semi-mythic figures. Oral traditions in the Horn of Africa speak of ancient rain-callers, individuals who could summon or repel storms. While such tales are not literal history, they echo the influence such specialists may have held. Power, even perceived power, becomes dangerous, and danger requires secrecy. One particularly intriguing site lies in the Zagros Mountains of Iran, where early shelters contain both weathered stones and bone tools, with patterns that resemble lightning motifs. Scholars still debate whether these represent literal storms or symbolic concepts, but their presence alongside ritual hearths suggests ceremonial use. Some fringe theorists propose early storm deities emerged from this region, shaped by the voices of these oracular figures. But what truly set the rain oracles apart was their ability to merge sensory experience with storytelling. They didn't merely interpret storms, they wove them into the cosmology of their groups. A sudden downpour could become an ancestor's warning. A violent thunderclap might signify the displeasure of spirits. A rainbow, a blessing, a promise, a sign of renewal. This blending of the meteorological and the mystical would later appear in many traditions, from the thunder gods of Indo-European myth to the rain-calling rituals of Mesoamerica. Yet the roots of such beliefs lie much earlier, in quiet shelters where oracles leaned forward, eyes half closed, listening to the sky speak. As humanity settled and began building permanent sanctuaries, these weather-watching traditions evolved. They merged with other forms of ritual knowledge, astronomy, dream interpretation, symbol carving, creating complex priesthoods and layered mythologies. But the essence remained. Certain individuals could hear what others could not. Now, as we leave the storms behind and step toward the dawn of monumental ritual architecture, we approach a turning point where hidden knowledge is no longer carried by individuals alone, but etched into stone, where secrecy takes physical form in chambers built for those few deemed worthy to enter, the forbidden rooms of Eridu. Before Babylon, before Uruk's crowded avenues, or the ziggurats that would one day pierce the Mesopotamian skyline, there was Eridu, a settlement older than memory, older than writing, older even than many of the myths that later civilizations would claim as their own. Archaeologists date its earliest occupation to roughly 5,400 BCE, but the oral traditions surrounding Eridu reach far deeper, treating it not merely as a city but as the first city, a place where gods and humans existed in rare proximity. And at its heart lay something even more enigmatic: hidden rooms, sealed chambers beneath layered temples, spaces whispered about even in ancient texts, spaces meant for only a chosen few. We begin with the mound. To the untrained eye, Tel Abu Shahrain, Eridu's modern archaeological site, looks like any other windswept desert rise. But beneath its cracked surface lies a vertical stack of temples, one built upon the ruins of the last, descending through time like geological layers of belief. At the base, archaeologists uncovered one of the earliest known shrines dedicated to Enki, the god of fresh water, wisdom, and deep knowledge. But what drew scholars' fascination were the rooms beneath the visible temples, narrow, hidden, deliberately sealed, even in antiquity. Mainstream archaeologists interpret these spaces as foundational structures, storage areas, or earlier phases of the temple. Yet a number of unusual features challenge this reading: sealed doorways with no sign of collapse, niches containing offerings positioned with odd precision, and chambers with soot marks, despite a total lack of ventilation. Fringe theorists argue these were forbidden rooms, reserved for ritual activity hidden from the public eye. Scholars still debate whether these chambers served a mundane purpose, a ceremonial one, or both. Imagine the earliest of these rooms, small, low-ceilinged, its walls plastered smooth, the air cool and still. A faint shimmer of torchlight dances across the clay. In the center sits a basin carved into the earth, filled with water, so still it mirrors the flame perfectly. Around it stand a handful of figures, elders of the settlement, custodians of knowledge passed across generations. They speak softly, if at all. Their actions are deliberate. Water drips from their hands as they perform gestures whose meaning has long since vanished into time. Water rituals in Eridu were no secret. Later, Sumerians openly worshipped Enki as the lord of the freshwater abyss, the Apsu. But some rituals, hinted at in later texts, involved a deep chamber, a sealed room of knowing, or the room beneath the waters. These references, though metaphorical, echo strangely against the archaeological evidence of Eridu's subterranean spaces. Scholars still debate whether these texts refer to physical rooms or mythic constructs. One chamber in particular, dating to Eridu's earliest phases, contained a set of unusual items: a cluster of fish bones arranged in a spiral, a clay figurine lying face down beside a freshwater shell, and a narrow groove carved into the floor, leading toward a small hole in the wall. The function is unclear. A drainage channel, or something more symbolic? Fringe interpreters argue that the spiral arrangement reflects a water-based ritual sequence, perhaps tied to seasonal flooding or purification rites. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, emphasizing the need for more data. But secrecy in Eridu wasn't limited to architecture. It permeated the structure of early priesthoods. In later Sumerian sources, priests associated with Enki are described as those who know the deep, individuals possessing mystical knowledge of creation, purification, and craft. Some texts hint that such knowledge was restricted, shared only with initiates through whispered formulas. While these texts come millennia after Eridu's earliest phases, they hint at an older tradition of guarded wisdom. Picture an apprentice standing before the entrance to one of these early chambers. The elder places a hand on his shoulder, instructing him to bow his head before entering. The symbols painted on the wall, simple patterns of wavelines or fish motifs, hold meanings he does not yet understand. Inside, the faint smell of clay and cool water wraps around him. He is told to sit in silence, listening to the distant pulse of water moving beneath the earth. Over time, he learns to interpret this sound at first as mere noise, later as message. One of the most intriguing finds at Eridu is a series of clay cones bearing early cuneiform-like markings, not full script, but signs that appear repetitive, intentional. Some scholars believe these represent proto-administrative records, yet the cones were found in unusual contexts, not in public areas, but near sealed rooms. Could they have been instructional tools? Ritual markers? Tokens of initiation? Scholars still debate whether these pre-writing signs were practical or symbolic. The construction phases of the Eridu temples offer another puzzle. Each new temple was built on top of the previous one, but the earlier foundations were not destroyed, they were preserved. This layering suggests a reverence for what came before, as if the older structures held a power or knowledge that the newer temples sought to contain. The earliest rooms, especially the subterranean ones, appear intentionally protected. Entryways were blocked, walls reinforced. Was this preservation for structural stability or a ritual sealing meant to close the knowledge within? Fringe interpretations claim that Eridu's priests intentionally buried secrets beneath the later temples, in a tradition echoed in later Mesopotamian foundation deposits. These deposits, objects buried under buildings for protection, sometimes contained small figurines, inscribed tablets, or offerings meant to serve the structure spiritually. But at Eridu, the sealed rooms seem older and more enigmatic, predating such standardized deposits by thousands of years. Scholars still debate whether these chambers represent precursors to later foundation practices. Water also played a significant psychological role. In a region where drought and flood shaped survival, water held spiritual weight. To control water symbolically, ritually meant to control life itself. Thus, those who understood the rituals of water purification, or who knew when and how to perform offerings, were seen as mediators between the human world and the watery abyss below. Their knowledge was valuable, dangerous, and therefore secret. In one reconstructed ritual, based on later Sumerian liturgies but informed by archaeological evidence from Eridu, a priest may have entered a hidden chamber to perform a stilling rite. The ritual involved calming turbulent waters, literally or symbolically, by pouring purified water into a basin while reciting formulas. The eldest members would observe, ensuring the novice performed each step precisely. A single mistake might render the ritual ineffective. Secrecy preserved precision. Eridu's influence spread. Even in later myths, the city is called the home of the Abzu priests, custodians of deep wisdom. These myths echo real patterns. The earliest priesthoods emerged not in bustling cities, but in quiet sanctuaries where knowledge was guarded in rooms few could enter. And so, the forbidden rooms of Eridu are more than archaeology. They are symbols of a shift, the moment when secret knowledge moved from individuals into architecture, when rituals found permanent homes in clay chambers, when spaces themselves became initiatory tools. Now, leaving Eridu's sealed rooms behind, we ascend from the underground into the open air to the ceremonial complexes where stone and sky work together, and where mysteries become encoded in architecture designed to confound and enlighten in equal measure. Harvesters of the moonlight. Before written calendars, before astronomical observatories, before priests measured the heavens with copper tools, there were those who watched the moon. They did not watch from within cities or towering temples, but from open fields, rocky plateaus, and windswept clearings where nothing blocked the night sky. These early sky watchers were not astronomers in the modern sense. They were ritualists, harvesting the moon's light as if it were a substance, an essence capable of shaping fate. Their world was lit not by street lamps or torches, but by a darkness so complete that moonlight became a profound event. A new moon plunged the landscape into void. A full moon transformed it into silver clarity. For early humans, this cycle was not just celestial, it was spiritual. Archaeological hints of this moon-focused ritualism appear across the globe, though in faint, fragmented form. At the site of Warren Field in Scotland dating to around 10,000 years ago, researchers found pits aligned with lunar cycles, possibly the earliest known lunar calendar. Mainstream scholars interpret it as a timekeeping structure. Fringe thinkers see something more, a ceremonial ground where moonlight marks stages of ritual. Scholars still debate whether the alignment was practical, spiritual, or both. Imagine a Paleolithic clearing somewhere in the ancient Near East or Europe. A ring of people sits silently, their breaths visible in the night air. In the center stands a carved wooden pole or antler stake. Its surface is marked with faint, repeating notches. Moonlight catches the ridges, casting elongated shadows on the ground. An elder steps forward, raising a smooth piece of bone polished until it glows white in the lunar light. The bone isn't symbolic by itself. It becomes symbolic only now, under the full moon, when it seems to drink the light. This act, harvesting moonlight, is central to many early rituals. Though the phrase is poetic, the practice is real in a behavioral sense. Bone, shell, and polished stone reflect moonlight intensely. Archaeologists excavating sites like Gough's Cave in England or Mezierich in Ukraine have found artifacts deliberately smoothed, likely to catch light. Mainstream scholars often attribute this to craftsmanship. Fringe theorists propose ritual usage under moonlit ceremonies. Scholars still debate whether the polishing served practical beauty or mystical purpose. There's also a curious pattern involving animal bones with etched parallel lines found in various sites. France's Abri Blanchard, Israel's Hayonim Cave, Russia's Zaraysk. Some show sequences that could represent lunar phases. Mainstream interpretations vary tally marks, decorative patterns, mnemonic tools, but the lunar explanation remains compelling. If these marks represent the moon's waxing and waning, the bones functioned as personal lunar trackers, portable calendars carried by ritual specialists. A striking example comes from a bone fragment in the Dordogne region, 13 carved notches arranged in a curve, 13 the number of lunar cycles in a solar year. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the pattern repeats across distant regions. Scholars still debate whether these early people tracked the moon intentionally or stumbled upon the repetition without recognizing its cosmic significance. Now imagine a moonlit ritual tied to such bones. A group gathers on a hilltop where the horizon stretches unobstructed. The ritual leader produces the carved bone and holds it up to the full moon, allowing the light to pass across each notch. As the moon's rays strike the ridges, they cast shadows that elongate and contract. The group perceives this as communication, a visual language spoken by the sky. To early humans, light itself carried power. Firelight was controlled, mortal, created through effort, but moonlight was effortless, celestial. It appeared on its own, guided by cosmic time. To harvest, it was to claim a piece of the heavens. The moon's connection to water, tides, and fertility deepened its spiritual weight. Though Paleolithic communities may not have understood tides scientifically, They likely noticed patterns, especially those living near coasts. In the caves of southern Iberia, red ochre markings appear beside shell caches. Some researchers argue these were part of lunar rituals tied to shellfish harvesting. Fringe writers frame them as moon temples. Scholars still debate whether these markings relate to ecological cycles or ceremonial ones. One particularly evocative archaeological find comes from the Levant, a set of basalt stones arranged in a circle discovered near a seasonal marsh. A shallow bowl-like depression sits in the center. Experiments show that when filled with water, the bowl reflects the moon perfectly, creating a miniature sky on the ground. Mainstream scholars see this as accidental. Fringe theorists imagine nocturnal gatherings where people gazed into the reflection as if peering into another world. Scholars still debate whether this bowl had ritual significance or served a mundane purpose. Secrecy flourished naturally in these moonlit gatherings. The rituals often took place far from settlements, where only initiates ventured. Moonlight, unlike fire, could not be controlled. It demanded timing. Some nights were too dim, some are too bright. Some rituals required the first crescent moon, others the gibbous or the full. This created a calendar of secrets, dates known only to those permitted to attend. In many later cultures, the moon becomes a keeper of hidden knowledge, the symbol of mystery, intuition, and cycles of change. This association likely began here, in the Paleolithic, where moonlit rituals shaped group identity. Those who mastered the cycles, who could predict when the moon would vanish or swell, became valuable, possibly feared. Their knowledge allowed them to time ceremonies tied to migration, hunting, or fertility. One fringe tradition claims early humans believed the moon itself watched rituals, acting as witnesses. While speculative, this idea resonates with certain burial orientations in Natufian sites of the Levant, where bodies face open sky rather than horizon. Scholars still debate whether this reflects lunar reverence or simply practical placement. Now picture an initiation ritual under the full moon. A young member stands at the edge of a clearing while elders wait in silence. The initiate must walk across a field of polished stones, each reflecting moonlight in different intensities. Some appear bright, others dim. The initiate chooses a single stone. The elders interpret that choice. The stone's glow, strong or weak, signals the initiate's readiness. This is not superstition. It is a psychological rite, a test of perception and intuition. The moon shapes the human psyche. It governs sleep cycles, influences mood, alters how we see the world. Early humans noticed these effects long before science could explain them. Rituals grew around these observations, layering myth atop instinct. By the time early civilizations emerged, moon worship and its associated secret rites were already embedded in cultural memory. The lunar priestesses of ancient Ur, the moon temples of Harran, the syncretic lunar cults of Anatolia, all trace faint lines back to these Paleolithic gatherings. But for now, in our story, the moonlit rituals mark an evolution. Secrecy is no longer just about survival or environmental interpretation. It becomes spiritual, psychological, cosmic. And from here, we move toward cultures that shape stone not only to echo sound or preserve memory, but to frame the sky itself. Building sanctuaries where celestial light becomes a tool for mysteries deeper and older than history. Kingdom of the masked voices. Before kings ruled from thrones and scribes pressed wedge-shaped signs into clay, there were cultures where authority did not sit in a palace. It moved through the world wearing a mask. These were societies in which spiritual power was not embodied by a single leader, but distributed among individuals who, during ritual moments, transformed into something more than human. In many ancient regions, especially across early Anatolia, the Caucasus foothills, parts of the Zagros, and the Levant, archaeologists have found traces of masked traditions older than temples and older than writing itself. To modern eyes, masks are art. To early humans, masks were identity itself, and sometimes the absence of identity. A mask could turn a woman into an ancestor, a man into an animal spirit, a youth into a celestial messenger. And in some communities, the ones who wore the masks did so in secret rituals, under moonlight or torchlight, hidden from those not yet initiated. These masked voices, those who spoke through layers of carved wood, bone, leather, or clay, became the earliest ritual actors, wielding knowledge others feared. The archaeological traces are subtle yet compelling. In the highlands of eastern Anatolia, figurines carved with exaggerated facial features, oversized eyes, distorted mouths, date back more than 9,000 years. Mainstream scholars interpret them as symbolic or decorative. Fringe theorists propose they depict ritual masks worn by early spiritual specialists. Scholars still debate whether these figurines represent deities, ancestors, or human performers. Imagine a clearing at dusk. A group gathers in a semicircle while a series of masked figures emerge from behind a screen of woven reeds. Their steps are soft, rhythmic. The wooden masks painted with ochre, soot, and crushed chalk gleam faintly in the firelight. The air thickens with expectation. Those watching do not see neighbors or kin. They see something other, something frightening and sacred. The performers speak not with their own voices, but with altered tones deepened, disrupted, or modulated through carved resonators attached to the masks. Such resonators have been found in various pre-pottery sites in Syria and Turkey. Small bone tubes or wooden attachments that could change a speaker's voice. Scholars still debate whether these were musical instruments or vocal modifiers. This altered speech is crucial. A masked voice does not speak as a person, they speak as a spirit. And spirits, in early cosmologies, were often the ones who delivered forbidden teachings. Mask traditions are found in some of the earliest ritual constructions on Earth. At Göbekli Tepe, several stone pillars display stylized human faces, some with hollowed eyes, others with angular, mask-like features. While not literal masks, their stylization evokes concealment. A carved limestone mask, discovered nearby, and dated to roughly the same period, strengthens the connection. Fringe commentators argue that Göbekli Tepe's enclosures hosted mask ceremonies involving trance and possession. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, though they agree the site served ritual functions whose nature is still debated. Now imagine a novice, perhaps a young hunter nearing adulthood, invited to a secret ritual for the first time. He is led through narrow passageways into a chamber lit only by fire reflected on polished stone. At the far end waits a masked elder. The elder's voice emerges low and oscillating, produced perhaps by a hidden resonating tube. The novice's heartbeat quickens. He knows he is not meant to see who lies behind the mask. The identity must remain unknown, for anonymity gives the ritual its power. The elder delivers a teaching part myth, part moral instruction, part practical wisdom, couched in symbolism. The novice must unravel over years. Secrecy in these masked societies was multifaceted. Some masks were used in public ceremonies, others only in private rituals for initiates. Some masks symbolized benevolent spirits, others invoked darker forces. Only a select few could wear the most powerful masks. These restrictions appear in later cultures, the Dogon of Mali, the ancient inhabitants of the Caucasus, and the Pueblos of North America, but their roots likely extend deep into prehistory. One fascinating archaeological find comes from the Nahal Himar cave in Israel, plastered skulls with preserved organic materials attached. Some researchers believe these were masked relics used in ancestral rites around 9,000 years ago. Their hollow eyes and preserved features are haunting. Scholars still debate whether they were worn, displayed, or used as ritual intermediaries. Masks were more than faces. They were lenses. Through them, Rituals became performances, blending sound, movement, and atmosphere. A performer wearing an animal mask might crouch, snarl, stomp, or shake rattles filled with seeds. Another, wearing a sky mask decorated with star-like dots, might speak in riddles, describing the motions of the heavens in poetic metaphors. A third, taking on the role of ancestor, might deliver warnings or blessings. These performances were not entertainment. They were enactments of cosmology. They taught children the structure of the world. They reminded adults of communal obligations. They honored the dead. They explained storms, seasons, illness, and dreams. The masked voices did what writing would one day do. But the masks also served a darker purpose. They created distance between message and messenger. A teaching delivered by a masked figure carries more weight than one delivered by a peer. It is harder to question. It feels absolute. If the mask represents a spirit or ancestor, the knowledge becomes untouchable, unchallengeable. This dynamic appears in later priesthoods' Egyptian ritual masks, Greek theatrical masks used in temple festivals, Mesoamerican ritual headdresses, but its seed lies in prehistoric masked traditions. Consider the psychological transformation of the masked performer. Anthropologists studying ritual performance note that wearing a mask often induces dissociation. The performer feels they become the entity represented. This phenomenon is not limited to modern cultures. It likely existed in Paleolithic and Neolithic rites as well. Thus, the mask was both a symbol and tool, a gateway to altered states of consciousness. One fringe theory proposes that certain masks, particularly those carved with elongated faces or exaggerated eyes, were used during night rituals involving trance, drumming, and controlled breathing. The idea is speculative but intriguing. In many cultures, masks help ritual specialists shift reality by adopting an identity outside ordinary life. Scholars still debate the extent of trance in prehistoric masked rites, but the possibility remains strong. Now imagine the climax of a masked ceremony. The performers gather around a stone circle, the fire crackles, the shadows lengthen. One mask, painted in dark pigments and adorned with feathers or animal hair, steps forward. The voice that emerges is unrecognizable, a deep, vibrating tone produced through a resonator. The group falls silent. This figure delivers a message that will shape decisions about hunting, migration, or conflict. And when the ritual ends, the mask is hidden away, placed in a sealed pit, hung in a secret alcove, or buried beneath the floor of a hut. Such secrecy appears in the archaeological record. In Çatalhöyük, masks and ritual objects were found buried under platforms, suggesting they were hidden after ceremonies. In the Caucasus, some Neolithic settlements contain pits with intentionally broken masks, implying ritual deactivation. Scholars still debate whether these practices indicate fear, respect, or both. The masked voices shaped early societies in ways we may never fully understand. They mediated between the visible and invisible worlds. They embodied the sacred. They guarded knowledge by wrapping it in myth, rhythm, and anonymity, and they forged one of humanity's most enduring ideas, that truth sometimes speaks most powerfully from behind a concealed face. Now, as we move forward, these masked traditions begin to merge with other streams of ritual knowledge, astronomy, water rites, dreamwalking, ancestral veneration, setting the stage for the first great fusion of myth and science, the birth of cultures where the stars themselves became secret texts, and where skywatchers carried the responsibilities once held by masked performers, stargazers of the wind temples. Long before observatories crowned mountaintops and astronomer priests traced constellations onto clay, there existed a quieter, more ancient lineage of skywatchers, individuals who read the heavens not from libraries or royal courts, but from the raw edge of the natural world. These early stargazers stood on windswept ridges, on cliffs overlooking plains, on terraces where the night sky stretched unbroken from horizon to horizon. They did not record their observations with styluses or ink. Instead, they embedded them in memory, in ritual, and in sacred architecture built from little more than stone and wind. Scattered across Anatolia, the Levant, Central Asia, and even the high plains of early Europe, archaeologists have uncovered enigmatic structures, semicircular walls, standing stones arranged in arcs, and wind-sheltered platforms dating anywhere from 10,000 to 6,000 BCE. Mainstream scholars describe these as early communal spaces or windbreaks. Fringe researchers call them wind temples, places where skywatchers used the wind itself as part of the ritual apparatus. Scholars still debate whether these structures served practical, ritual, or astronomical purposes, but their placement almost always at elevated vantage points hints at cosmic intentions. Imagine standing atop one such ridge during the late Mesolithic period. The sky above is clearer than anything modern eyes can easily recall. No smoke, no haze, no artificial light. Stars crowd the darkness in impossible numbers. Behind you, a semicircular stone wall blocks the prevailing wind, creating a pocket of still air. In front of you, the landscape opens into a vast plain. The stargazer steps forward, placing a hand on the flat capstone at the center of the platform. Their eyes lift to the horizon, tracking a bright star as it dips toward the western rim of the world. This star is important. It has appeared consistently for generations at roughly the same point each season. Its rising and setting mark moments crucial for migration, for hunting, for ritual, and only those trained to read the sky know what its position means. Evidence for such early sky watching appears at sites like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. While these monumental sanctuaries are more complex than simple windbreaks, their enclosures align subtly with celestial events, perhaps solstices, perhaps significant star risings. Mainstream scholars remain cautious about assigning definitive astronomical functions, but the architecture suggests awareness of the sky's cycles. Scholars still debate whether Göbekli Tepe's builders intentionally encoded celestial knowledge. More modest structures, however, provide clearer hints. The remains of low, stone-walled platforms found across the Zagros foothills and the Taurus mountains show deliberate alignment with natural features, notches in the horizon, distant peaks where the sun or stars rise at predictable times. Some platforms appear oriented toward the heliacal rising of bright stars like Sirius or Fomalhaut, visible markers of seasonal change. But what made these places unique was the fusion of wind and starlight. Wind is not merely weather. In many ancient cultures, wind was breath, spirit, messenger. At night, on high ridges, the wind carries a distinct presence, cool, steady, ancient. Early stargazers used it as part of their sensory toolkit. A sudden shift in wind direction, paired with the appearance of a particular star, could be interpreted as an omen. A calm night with no wind could signal ritual readiness. Picture an initiatory ritual where novices sit in a semicircle, wrapped in hides to withstand the cold. The elder skywatcher lifts a hand, signaling silence. A bright point Venus perhaps emerges from behind a distant ridge. As it appears, the wind drops suddenly, a natural effect of nighttime cooling. But to those gathered, the timing feels supernatural. The elder speaks softly, telling the novices that the star has calmed the breath of the world. Such associations, repeated over generations, build mythic frameworks. Another curious archaeological clue lies in circular arrangements of stones, with openings designed to funnel wind into narrow channels. When wind passes through, these channels produce faint, flute-like tones. Natural aeolian harps, formed from stone. Some researchers have identified such arrangements in the deserts of Jordan and in upland Iran. Mainstream interpretations propose erosion or coincidence. Fringe theorists argue intentional design ritual sound meant to accompany sky-watching ceremonies. Scholars still debate whether these wind tones played a ritual role. If such structures were indeed used in ceremonies, imagine their effect. A group stands beneath the stars, listening to the wind sing softly through stone channels. The sound is melodic, eerie, and timeless. It blends with the distant call of night birds and the hiss of grass. In this atmosphere, teachings about the stars acquire emotional weight. These teachings were never given all at once. Knowledge was layered. A novice first learned the constellations visible in each season, patterns of animals, ancestors, or spirits traced across the sky. Later, they learned the rising times of particular stars. Still later, they learned the deeper meanings, the mythic stories linking sky and earth, the rituals tied to lunar phases, the omens derived from unusual celestial events. But the final layer, revealed only to a few, involved using the stars for prediction. Not prediction in the modern astronomical sense, but in the symbolic sense. If a certain star flickered unusually, it might signal drought. If two bright objects approached each other, it might symbolize conflict within the community. These interpretations were not superstition, they were frameworks for decision-making, and because they guided real choices when to migrate, when to hunt, when to perform rites, they required secrecy. One particularly enigmatic site sits in the foothills of ancient Armenia, a stone platform with circular holes drilled into its surface. When filled with water, these holes reflect the night sky. The reflections are stable, protected from wind. A sky watcher could observe the stars' positions without looking upward. Mainstream scholars interpret these as grinding depressions or storage pits. But experiments with water-filled cavities accurately reflect stars. Fringe researchers propose they were early star mirrors. Scholars still debate whether they served practical or ritual purposes. Imagine a ritual performed around such a star mirror. The sky watcher kneels beside the stone, watching the reflection of a star drift across the water's surface as the night advances. The movement is subtle, meditative. Initiates watch as the elder uses a fingertip to trace the star's path on the water. The reflection shimmers, dances. The initiates feel as if they are touching the sky itself. Over time, these sky watchers became a distinct class within their communities, guardians of celestial knowledge. Their power grew not from wealth or force, but from their ability to explain the mysterious. When meteors streaked across the sky, they offered meaning. When the moon darkened, they provided reassurance. When stars vanished behind clouds, or reappeared in new positions after months of absence, they interpreted the change. The earliest myths of sky gods, star spirits, and celestial ancestors were shaped by these wind-born astronomers. Their teachings eventually seeded the astronomical traditions of Sumer, the zodiacal systems of early Mesopotamia, and the star calendars of pastoral peoples across Eurasia. Yet in these early eras, their practices remained secret, shared only with those initiated on the wind temples where stone met sky, where silence spoke louder than words, where the breath of the world carried omens, and the heavens themselves became the oldest forbidden text. Now, as we descend from these ridges of wind and stars, our path leads towards something far more structured. Temples built not just for ceremony, but for encoding cosmology, places where the sky is not merely read, but architecturally captured, and where rites begin to blend astronomy with myth in sophisticated ways. The secret steps of the underworld. Long before civilizations carved their netherworlds into tablets, long before priests recited epic journeys through shadowed realms, there existed a much older, quieter tradition, one rooted not in writing or myth, but in descent. Across the ancient world, from Anatolia to the Zagros, from the Levant to early Europe, archaeologists have uncovered deep pits, sunken chambers, and stepped shafts carved into earth and stone long before the emergence of organized religion. Their purpose remains uncertain: storage, shelter, ritual, but when examined closely when studied in context, they reveal a pattern too deliberate, too dramaturgical, to be dismissed. These structures represent humanity's earliest attempts to enter the underworld not metaphorically but physically. Across Neolithic settlements in southeastern Turkey and northern Mesopotamia, archaeologists have found narrow stairways leading down into dark, echoing chambers beneath early houses. Some are simple cellars. Others are different. Their walls are smoothed, their entrances are discreet, their floors bear traces of pigment-red ochre, black charcoal, sometimes white gypsum. Mainstream scholars suggest ritual use tied to ancestor veneration. Fringe theorists propose these chambers were stages for initiatory descents. Scholars still debate whether these early shafts were symbolic underworlds. Imagine one such chamber in its original state, around 9,000 years ago. A small house stands above mud brick walls, a hearth, sleeping platforms. In one corner, beneath a woven mat or clay covering, a square opening descends into darkness. The air below is cool still. A single rope hangs down the shaft. An initiate, trembling with anticipation, grips the rope and begins to climb down. Their feet touch the packed clay floor. The entrance closes above them. Blackness, silence. A total sensory reset. This descent, literal and psychological, would become one of humanity's most enduring ritual motifs. Evidence for such practices appears in multiple ancient settlements. At Çatalhöyük, some houses contained small, subterranean rooms with skull caches and unusual plasterwork. At Tel Caramel, even earlier, deep circular pits show signs of repeated entry, fire use, and pigment application. At Jerf el Amar, there are sunken communal structures with narrow entrances, some containing carved stone benches arranged in a circle, ideal for ritual gatherings. Scholars still debate whether these spaces were used for initiation. At Göbekli Tepe, beneath the monumental enclosures, archaeologists discovered deep shafts cut into the bedrock. Some contain stone platforms, others hold animal remains or strange concentrations of pigment. These shafts resemble descent points. Their purpose remains mysterious. And then there are the enigmatic plastered skulls found across the Levant at Jericho, Ain Ghazal, and Kfar HaHoresh, dating from 9000 to 7000 BCE. These skulls were removed from bodies weeks after burial, plastered, painted, and sometimes placed in subterranean rooms. The dead were literally given new faces beneath the floors of the living. These burial practices suggest a belief that the underworld was not distant. It was below the home, a realm accessed through ritual. But the most striking evidence of intentional descent appears in the so-called stairs to nowhere. Across Anatolia and the Caucasus, archaeologists have found carved stairways, some descending only 4 or 5 steps before ending abruptly in solid earth. There is no chamber below, no room, no storage niche, just a staircase leading into darkness. Mainstream scholars propose incomplete construction or erosion, yet some of these stairways show no sign of collapse. They were deliberately built to end in nothing. Fringe theorists call them symbolic descents. Scholars still debate the function. Picture an early ritual specialist standing at the top of such a stair. They wear a mask, the kind we explored in the last section, or perhaps only a smear of pigment across the eyes. Behind them stand novices. The elder descends the steps slowly, ceremonially. At the bottom they kneel, place hands on the final step, and whisper a chant. The novices watch as the elder symbolically disappears from the world above. The underworld is invoked, not entered. Such symbolic descents foreshadow later mythologies. Millennia later, Sumerians would write of Inanna's descent to the underworld, Egyptians of the sun god's nightly journey, Greeks of Orpheus and Persephone. The motif is global, but its roots may lie here, in small, dark, handcrafted thresholds, One of the most intriguing finds supporting ritual descent comes from Ohalo II near the Sea of Galilee, an early site dating to the end of the Paleolithic. Among its structures is a circular depression with evidence of repeated burning and reburial. While mainstream scholars view it as a simple hearth associated with domestic activity, fringe theorists imagine it as a proto-shaft, a place where ashes and offerings move downward, symbolically feeding the underworld. Scholars still debate the meaning. Descent is psychologically powerful. In darkness, the mind shifts. The heartbeat becomes louder. The breath becomes the only sound. The body feels vulnerable, exposed. In this mental landscape, teachings delivered by a ritual specialist carry immense weight. A whisper becomes thunder. A gesture becomes revelation. This is what early descent rituals likely sought, a transformation shaped by the environment. Picture an initiate sitting in the dark chamber beneath a Neolithic home. The elder above scratches a flint against stone. Sparks shower downward, illuminating the chamber in split-second bursts. For each spark, the elder speaks a word fragments of a story about ancestors, spirits, or the cyclic nature of life and death. The initiate cannot see the elder's face. They hear only voices, echo, spark. Knowledge flows not as lecture, but as experience. There is a curious archaeological detail supporting such sensory rituals. In several subterranean spaces, most notably at Chaionu in Turkey, researchers found floors stained with alternating layers of red and black pigment. These pigments are associated, in later cultures, with life and death, fire and night, ascent and descent. Fringe thinkers argue the coloring marks ceremonial thresholds. Mainstream scholars remain cautious, saying pigments could mark repeated use or cleaning. Scholars still debate the symbolism. Wind temples taught people to read the sky. Descent chambers taught them to read the dark. Over generations, descent became more formalized. Steps became more uniform. Chambers became more elaborate. The underworld became a structured idea, an entire realm with rules, guardians, and thresholds. Ritual specialists now guided novices through symbolic death and rebirth. The initiate would enter the shaft as a youth and emerge as an adult, enter as unknowing and emerge as enlightened, enter as individual and emerge as part of the collective myth. Burial practices evolved in parallel. The placement of ancestors beneath floors seen across Levantine and Anatolian sites may reflect belief in an underworld below. The dead were not gone, they were accessible, listening, guiding. Fringe theorists take this further, suggesting that early descent rituals allowed shamans to speak with the dead from within sealed chambers. While this stretches evidence, it echoes tendencies found later in necromantic traditions from Greece, Mesopotamia, and beyond. Scholars still debate whether such practices existed this early. What is certain is this: the earliest underworlds were not imagined. They were entered physically, deliberately, secretly. And now, as we ascend from these depths and move forward in time, descent rituals give rise to something even more mysterious. Hidden knowledge tied not only to earth and darkness, but to stars beneath the earth, encoded in the first true fusion of cosmology and architecture mystery complexes, where the heavens and the underworld meet in one forbidden space. The fire that could not be shared. Long before metallurgy, long before furnaces roared in city workshops or bronze weapons shaped the fate of kingdoms, there existed a far older mastery of fire, one so controlled, so precise, and so consequential that it became the centerpiece of secret rites. Fire was not merely warmth or light. In the deep prehistory of Anatolia, the Levant, and the Caucasus, fire was knowledge, and knowledge could be dangerous. Across early Neolithic and late Mesolithic sites, archaeologists have found traces of highly unusual hearths, fires that burned hotter than ordinary domestic flames, fires that show signs of selection, preparation, and deliberate restriction, Some of these hearths appear in enclosed chambers, sealed alcoves, and side rooms hidden within settlements. They are not cooking fires, they are not communal hearths. They are ritual fires, controlled by a select few. Only those deemed ready were allowed to witness them. Only the initiated learned how they were made. Their purpose? We can only guess, but the patterns suggest something far deeper than efficiency. Let us begin with one of the most mysterious such structures, the skull building at Çayonu Tepesi, a pre-pottery Neolithic site in southeastern Turkey. Beneath its floors, archaeologists discovered scorched remains and plastered surfaces stained by repeated exposure to extreme heat. Some rooms contain evidence of fire intense enough to vitrify mud brick far beyond ordinary cooking temperatures. These chambers also housed caches of skulls, some reshaped or plastered, arranged with ritual care. Mainstream scholars propose ceremonial burning or sacrifice. Fringe theorists insist these rooms were used for secret fire rites, possibly connected to purification or transformation. Scholars still debate whether these fires had symbolic or practical origins. Imagine a chamber lit only by a faint glow from embers resting in a shallow basin. Clay walls absorb the heat, darkening to red. In the center, an elder one of the firekeepers moves slowly, tending a flame made from carefully selected woods, resins, or grasses. The fire has a distinct smell, a distinct color, a distinct sound. It is not like any fire used for daily life. Those gathered around the threshold novices, waiting breathlessly, are not allowed to cross. They may watch, but not approach. For to approach the sacred fire before you are ready is to risk imbalance. Fire, after all, does not forgive ignorance. At sites across the early Neolithic Near East, we find evidence of intense heat treatment of stone obsidian, flint, even limestone. Some of this was practical, used to improve napping. Yet the contexts are telling. Some heat-treated stones appear in ritual buildings, not workshops. Some show no signs of reworking, as if the heating was an act in itself. Fringe theorists argue these stones were activated, imbued with symbolic meaning through controlled burning. Mainstream archaeologists acknowledge the ritual context but hesitate to speculate further. Scholars still debate whether such practices reflect early pyrotechnology or sacred performance. But the idea of fire that cannot be shared appears globally. Among Australian Aboriginal cultures, certain fire-making techniques are taught only to initiated men. Among Amazonian groups, special fires burn in men's houses during rituals. Among early pastoral societies in Central Asia, ethnographic accounts reveal fires tended only by elders, believed to connect the living to ancestral spirits. Though these practices belong to much later eras, they echo patterns that began thousands of years before writing. Consider the deep psychological weight of fire. For early humans, fire was miraculous and terrifying, a force that transformed everything it touched. Bones became charcoal, clay became ceramic. The stone changed color, texture, and hardness. Fire turned raw meat to nourishment, but also forests to ash. It created light where none should exist. To understand fire was to grasp the border between life and destruction. Thus, control of fire became control of mystery. One of the most evocative archaeological discoveries supporting secret fire rites comes from a site near the foothills of the Zagros Mountains, a narrow chamber lined with smooth stone slabs, containing a basin of hardened ash mixed with fragments of pigment and bone. The bones are unusual, they show signs of heating not just at the surface but throughout, suggesting prolonged exposure to high temperatures. Some pieces were arranged deliberately into geometric shapes, now barely visible. Mainstream scholars propose funerary rites. Fringe researchers argue this chamber hosted initiation involving symbolic death and rebirth through fire. Scholars still debate the room's purpose. Imagine an initiate kneeling before one of these ritual hearths. Their eyes water from the heat. The shadows shift across the wall, forming shapes that seem alive. They may be instructed to place an object into the flames, perhaps a small figurine, a carved bone, a personal token. The object blackens, cracks, collapses into embers. The initiate watches as something meaningful is consumed. This is the lesson. Fire transforms, fire destroys, fire reveals. One ritual, described in later Sumerian texts, likely echoing much older traditions, involves the fire of knowing, a flame lit in a sealed room before a priest descends into darkness for purification. While the text is from a later period, the concept of a secluded ritual fire aligns eerily well with the Neolithic archaeological record. Scholars still debate whether these textual echoes reflect real continuity or mythic reflection. At some sites, the secrecy surrounding fire extended to the architecture itself. Narrow corridors lead into ritual chambers. Entrances are angled or offset to control airflow. Floors are plastered repeatedly, as if cleaned after each ceremony. In certain cases, such as at Navali Chori, stone platforms bear scorch marks yet show no soot on nearby walls, indicating careful management of flames. This level of precision suggests knowledge beyond ordinary domestic experience. Now imagine a deeper layer of secrecy, the recipes of sacred fire, which woods to use, which resins to add, how to ignite the flame without sparks leaping too high, how to produce smoke that curls in a particular pattern. These techniques were not written down. They were taught through years of apprenticeship, whispered in closed rooms, demonstrated in silence. In many indigenous cultures today, the exact mixture of herbs and woods for ritual fires remains confidential, known only to designated elders. This global pattern hints at something fundamental. Fire, when linked to ritual, becomes guarded knowledge. The Neolithic firekeepers likely held similar authority. Their knowledge allowed them to create flames that burned blue, flames that produced minimal smoke, flames that popped in rhythm. These effects could appear miraculous to untrained observers. A fire that behaves unnaturally becomes a sign of the supernatural. One fringe theory suggests that certain pigments, particularly iron-rich ochre and manganese oxides, were sprinkled into ritual fires to produce sparks or colored flames. While speculative, experiments show this is possible. If true, the firekeepers may have appeared as magicians capable of commanding fire to change color on command. Scholars still debate whether such pyrotechnic effects were intentional in prehistory. But secrecy around fire was not merely about spectacle, it was about power. A group that controlled a fire controlled ceremony. A person who mastered fire could lead rituals, interpret omens, settle disputes. Fire became authority. In some Neolithic settlements, houses show evidence of communal hearths, surrounded by symbols or plastered artwork. Directly beside these hearths, archaeologists occasionally find small alcoves containing burned offerings, animal bones, beads, figurines. But in a different set of structures more secluded, less accessible, we find signs of specialized fires used in rites separate from the public. Two fires, two layers of knowledge, one shared openly, one forbidden. As we move forward, these secret fire rites begin to converge with other hidden traditions, astronomical knowledge, ancestor veneration, initiation through descent. And together, they form the architecture of something entirely new. The first true mystery traditions, where rituals are performed not in open fields or simple huts, but in carefully crafted sanctuaries designed to hold secrets for millennia. Our next step leads into those sanctuaries, places where stone and fire and shadow converge, where ceremonies become encoded in architecture, and where hidden chambers conceal the earliest proto-texts of sacred knowledge. When gods refused to die, before pantheons were carved in stone, before scribes inked myths onto clay, and long before religions codified their heavens and hells, there were gods who lived only in stories spoken softly, remembered fiercely, and guarded secretly. These were not gods of temples or empires. They were gods of hills, of trees, of springs, of forgotten ancestors. And, as early societies evolved, some of these gods were abandoned, at least publicly. Yet, in the shadows, in sealed rooms, forest clearings, hidden alcoves beneath houses, the old gods lived on. This is the story of the gods who refused to die, and of the secret traditions that protected them. We begin in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, around 9000 to 6500 BCE. Across the Fertile Crescent, the first large settlements, Çatalhöyük, Jericho, Ain Ghazal, were developing social hierarchies, ritual centers, and communal identities. New symbols were emerging, new rituals, new cosmologies. But people do not abandon their older beliefs easily. Beneath the surface of these evolving societies, older deities, nature spirits, ancestral figures, animal protectors, remained active in whispered rites. Archaeologists find their traces in places where official narratives do not reach. At Çatalhöyük, wall paintings in public spaces show clean geometric patterns and domesticated imagery. But hidden in inner rooms, rooms without windows, accessible through clustered platforms, are older symbols, leopards, vultures, shapeless deities rendered in rough form, reminiscent of Paleolithic traditions. Mainstream scholars argue these represent continuity of earlier ancestral practices. Fringe theorists insist they depict forbidden gods worshipped in secret. Scholars still debate whether these hidden rooms represent alternative cults or private ritual traditions. Imagine entering one such inner chamber thousands of years ago. The outer house is busy people preparing food, crafting tools, engaging in daily life. But behind a plastered wall lies a dim, enclosed room lit only by a tiny oil lamp. Sisters, brothers, parents, those initiated into the old rites, sit in a circle. On the wall before them, a fading leopard face stares from the plaster. In front of it sits a bowl of ashes, a few bones, and a painted figurine. The deity represented here is older than agriculture, older than the settlement itself. New rituals may honor new gods, but this one still receives offerings in secret. We see similar patterns in Jericho. Beneath the city's later structures, archaeologists discovered plastered skulls, ancestral heads recreated into lifelike visages. These skulls were stored in hidden rooms. Above ground, daily life continued as normal. Below, in darkness, the ancestors were tended. Scholars still debate whether the skull cult was a remnant of earlier animistic belief or part of Jericho's official ritual system. At Ain Ghazal in Jordan, massive statues nearly life-sized were buried with great care. Their eyes are wide, their expressions uncanny. Some are multi-headed, others are limbless. They were buried deliberately, ritually, after being displayed only briefly. Why bury such masterpieces? Mainstream scholars interpret it as ritual decommissioning. Fringe theories suggest the statues represented gods that could not be publicly worshipped once new social systems took hold. Scholars still debate whether the burial marks reverence, secrecy, or fear. Here emerges a key insight. When societies change, old gods do not simply vanish, they go underground. Consider early animal cults. Across the early Near East, wild animals feature heavily in secret ritual contexts even after agriculture became dominant. At Neolithic sites in Turkey and Syria, we find depictions of leopards, snakes, bulls, and vultures carved in relief or painted on private walls. Public structures emphasize domestic themes: cattle, fertility, order. Hidden spaces preserve wildness, unpredictability, danger. This duality suggests two cosmologies, one official, one secret. Now imagine a young initiate in a growing settlement. They participate in public ceremonies, honoring a new mother goddess or communal ancestor. But at night, their grandmother takes them to a smaller, private chamber. There, she recounts older myths, of the leopard spirit that prowls the world at night, of the vulture who carries the souls of the dead, of the snake who renews itself forever. These gods no longer appear in public festivals, but they remain alive in domestic ritual passed from elder to child in whispers. Archaeology confirms this pattern. In some settlements, figurines of certain animal spirits appear only in domestic areas, not in ceremonial ones. Scholars still debate whether this distinguishes elite cult practices from household religion, but the pattern is global. Household altars often preserve older gods long after official cults have changed. One particularly striking example is found in the Zagros Mountains. In several early sites, archaeologists discovered small shrines built beneath homes, subfloors, intentionally hollowed out to host offerings. These offerings include figurines far older in style than the settlement itself. Why keep such ancient figures? Fringe scholars argue they represent deities no longer publicly acknowledged. Mainstream researchers propose generational continuity of household ritual. Scholars still debate which interpretation is correct. As settlements grew into proto-cities, politics entered the picture. Emerging elites often promoted new gods, gods of order, of fertility, of craft, of agriculture. These gods served the needs of structured society. But older gods, gods of hunting, storm, wild animals, and ancestral forces, did not always fit neatly into new hierarchies. They became dangerous. They became forbidden. Imagine a council of elders deciding that the old rituals are too disruptive to social order. The old gods demand acts pre-dawn offerings, animal sacrifice, trance dances that no longer align with the stability the community seeks. So the elders decree that certain rites must cease. Publicly, they disappear. Privately, they persist. This historical dynamic appears again and again in later eras. The old tribal gods of Mesopotamia survive in household shrines long after city cults consolidate power. The pre-Olympian titans of Greece linger in mystery cults. The spirits of the Egyptian desert remain in magical papyri, centuries after state religion dominates. The pattern is ancient. In the prehistoric context, we see it archaeologically through ritual concealment objects hidden in pits, walls, and floors. At Çatalhöyük, dozens of figurines were deliberately placed under platforms where only initiated household members would know. At Jerf el Amar, certain symbols appear in private rooms, absent from public architecture. At Tel Halula, painted motifs of wild animals appear only in secondary spaces. Scholars still debate the meaning of these patterns, though the idea of suppressed or private gods is widely considered. But the idea of gods who refuse to die also hints at something deeper. These old gods were perceived as too powerful to abandon. If neglected, they might retaliate through storms, failed hunts, illness, misfortune. So offerings continued, not for devotion alone, but for protection. Picture an elder kneeling before a small clay figurine of a horned animal. Their hands tremble. They whisper a prayer they learned as a child, one no longer spoken in public. They place a pinch of grain beside the figurine, then cover it with a cloth. It is not faith alone driving this act, it is caution. This tension between new and old belief systems creates fertile ground for secrecy. Ritual specialists become intermediaries between eras. They preserve fragmented myths, encoded chants, and symbolic gestures whose full meaning may already be lost. Knowledge becomes fractured, layered, and mysterious. Some fringe theorists go further, proposing that these secret continuities formed the earliest proto-mystery traditions, precursors to Bronze Age mystery cults like those of Inanna, Dumuzi, Dionysus, and others. While speculative, the structural parallels are compelling. Initiation, secrecy, symbolic death and rebirth. preservation of older gods under new systems. Scholars still debate how directly these traditions connect. But what is undeniable is this: as societies evolve, their oldest gods do not vanish. They migrate into the shadows, carried by small circles of devotees who refuse to let the ancient stories fade. These devotees become the first secret keepers, forming a lineage of hidden knowledge that will one day blossom into complex esoteric traditions. As we move forward in our story, we enter a world where these secret survivals collide with expanding cosmologies, where ancient animal spirits merge with rising celestial gods, and where forbidden traditions begin to blend with the earliest sciences of the sky. Ahead lies the next transformation, a fusion of lost gods, stargazing, and ritual knowledge that sets the stage for the first true hybrid mysteries of the ancient world. The ship of hidden books. Long before papyrus rolled across the Nile, before clay tablets filled royal archives, and millennia before libraries rose in cities like Alexandria and Ashur, there existed something far stranger and far older. Floating archives of oral and symbolic knowledge carried not by scribes or priests, but by travelers who followed the water. These were not books in the modern sense. They were stories, diagrams carved into bone, coded knots on cords, sequences of shells threaded in deliberate patterns, pigments arranged on driftwood, chants that travelled from mouth to mouth with almost ritual precision, and they moved along rivers, lakes, and coastlines in the hands of a class of people often overlooked in archaeological narratives: water wanderers, the earliest mariners of the prehistoric world. To understand them, we must begin at the water's edge, at the places where land meets flow, where migration, exchange, and secrecy thrive. Ancient water roads. Water was the first highway. Before wheels, before pack animals dominated the plains, early humans used rivers and coastlines as natural routes. Archaeologists have discovered evidence of systematic water travel far earlier than once believed. At Franchthi Cave in Greece, obsidian from the island of Melos appears by 13,000 BCE, impossible to obtain without open water crossings. In Southeast Asia, humans reached islands like Sulawesi and Flores long before agriculture, hinting at even older seafaring traditions. Mainstream scholars view this as early maritime trade. Fringe thinkers argue something more, that these travelers were carriers of specialized knowledge, traders of stories, symbols, rituals. Scholars still debate whether early seafaring had ritual components. Where land-based ritual specialists guarded secrets in temples or caves, these water wanderers carried secrets across distances. Their libraries were mobile, hidden, encoded in objects only initiates could interpret. The floating custodians. Imagine a small raft or canoe carved from a single massive log. Along its edges hang cords of shells, each arranged in patterns meaningful only to the crew. Inside, a bundle wrapped in animal hide contains a polished bone tablet carved with spirals, arcs, and lines. It is not writing not yet, but a mnemonic tool used in ritual storytelling. 3 figures paddle in silence. They are not traders in the economic sense. They are messengers, traveling from one water settlement to another, delivering fragments of myth, ritual formulas, astronomical lore, or seasonal knowledge encoded in objects and songs. Their arrival is not casual, it is ceremonial. Ethnographic parallels suggest such roles existed across many early maritime cultures. In Polynesia, navigators memorized star paths and encoded them in chants. Among indigenous groups of the Pacific Northwest, ritual knowledge traveled in the form of decorated paddles, carvings, or woven patterns. While these examples are much later, they echo possibilities that stretch deep into prehistory. The hidden books. Across early lakeshore settlements like those of prehistoric Switzerland, the Sea of Galilee, and the early Danube archaeologists have found objects that seem strangely coded, carved antlers with repeating notches in symmetrical patterns. bone plaques etched with spirals and waves, drilled shells arranged in sequences not easily explained as jewelry, wooden planks darkened with pigment traces in geometric alignment. Mainstream scholars interpret these as decorative or symbolic, but in many cases, their exact repetition across distant communities suggests systematic transmission. Fringe theorists propose these were mnemonic devices, non-literate texts carried by water travelers. Scholars still debate whether such objects served communicative purposes. Imagine a ritual gathering in a lakeshore settlement around 8000 BCE. At dusk, villagers gather near a stone platform by the water. From the mist emerges a small craft. Its paddlers wear necklaces of uncommon shells. Shells from hundreds of miles away, the villagers kneel. The water wanderers step onto the shore, bearing an object wrapped in hide. They place the object, perhaps a carved bone panel, onto the platform. An elder touches it reverently. Only a handful of people understand the symbols. They study it by torchlight, whispering interpretations. This object may contain knowledge of seasonal changes, or of dangers spoken of in myth, or of celestial events witnessed by another community. But to keep such knowledge from the uninitiated, the bone's markings are deliberately cryptic. Symbols act like knots in a rope. They hold memory, but only if one knows how to untangle them. The enigmatic river stones. Along the Euphrates and the upper Tigris, archaeologists have discovered polished river stones with finely incised geometric patterns dating to around 9000–7000 BCE. Some show long, sinuous lines reminiscent of watercourses. Others depict concentric circles like eddies or whirlpools. These stones appear primarily near river ports, early landing points. Some researchers interpret them as tokens or counting stones. Others see ritual significance. Fringe theories claim they were maps, though likely symbolic rather than geographic. Scholars still debate their purpose. Picture a water wanderer holding such a stone before a fire. The lines catch the light, shifting as the stone rotates. An initiate watches closely as the wanderer traces a path across the stone's surface while reciting a story. The stone is not a literal map, it's a memory tool. The story and the markings are inseparable. Without the story, the stone is meaningless. Without the stone, the story collapses. This is how hidden knowledge travels, woven between object and voice. Why waterborne secrets? Water isolates, water binds. In many early societies, those who traveled by water encountered knowledge unavailable inland, stories of storms, celestial reflections, strange animals, distant customs. They became natural intermediaries between worlds. But they also became dangerous. Knowledge from afar can disrupt local traditions. A ritual practiced upriver might contradict a downstream belief. A myth from a distant lake might challenge local cosmology. Thus, water wanderers often operated semi-discreetly, sharing certain knowledge only with those deemed ready. At some settlements, archaeological evidence suggests that arrivals by boat were greeted with ritual purification, possibly a way to control what knowledge entered the community. At the ancient marsh settlement of Delme in Syria, burnt offerings appear near the water's edge, as if rituals were performed immediately upon arrival. Scholars still debate whether these rites were welcoming gestures or protective measures. The book that died and was reborn. One of the most curious patterns in prehistoric water cultures is the intentional destruction of symbolic objects. In many lakeshore sites, bone plaques or decorated stones were broken and buried shortly after use. This is not an accident, it is a ritual. The symbolic book lives only briefly, then it dies destroyed so that outsiders cannot access it. But fragments of its meaning survive in oral tradition, carried to the next settlement by the wanderers. Imagine a painted wooden plank carried across the water. It is used during a ritual, then burned. Its ashes scattered in the lake. The knowledge remains, but only in memory. This practice foreshadows later mystery traditions, where sacred texts were recited aloud, but never written down, or written down only to be ceremonially destroyed. The Great Maritime Threads. In time, these floating archives contributed to the development of early mythic networks, shared stories appearing across regions separated by hundreds of miles of water, a sky serpent appearing in Baltic myths and in early Danube engravings, a goddess of springs and wells found in early Anatolia and later in Europe, a boat of souls travelling across the night sky, an image seen in Proto-Indo-European traditions and much later in Egyptian mythology. While direct connections remain debated, the patterns are undeniable. Water unites. And somewhere between lake and river, between coastline and estuary, between raft and reed boat, a tradition emerges. The idea that knowledge can travel far, yet remain hidden from most, encoded, wrapped in secrecy, passed from voice to voice, object to object. These were the first books humanity ever carried, not written, but preserved, not read, but remembered, and not stored in libraries, but ferried across the shifting waters of a world in transition. Now we drift onward, toward the places where land cultures and water cultures met, where travelers brought secrets ashore, and where bustling ritual markets emerged, trading not food or goods, but fragments of spells, charms, and hidden rites. Ahead lies the night market of spells, a world where secrecy becomes currency, and where forbidden knowledge is traded in shadows under the pale glow of the moon. The night market of spells. Long before cities bustled with merchants, and before temple economies organized trade into orderly transactions, there existed a different kind of marketplace, one that awakened only after dusk. Hidden from ordinary eyes, these night markets existed on the edges of early settlements, near riverbanks, in forest clearings, and at crossroads where travelers could arrive without being noticed. They did not trade grain or obsidian or hides. They traded rituals, fragments of spells, charms, whispered formulas, gestures, and objects believed to hold power. These were the earliest occult bazaars, where knowledge was currency, secrecy was protection, and reputation was everything. Where the market began. Archaeologists rarely find direct evidence of such gatherings. They left no foundations, no stalls, no architecture. But they left patterns, objects clustered in ways that defy domestic explanation, bundles of animal bones arranged deliberately, pigments in unusual combinations, carved stones in disparate styles found side by side, foreign shells and local charms buried together as if exchanged in ritual contexts. One of the most intriguing sites lies overlooking the Euphrates, near the ancient area of the pre-pottery Neolithic B. Excavations revealed a pit filled with objects from multiple cultural zones: Anatolian beads, Levantine bone tools, Mesopotamian figurines, none of which belonged to the settlement's typical assemblage. Mainstream scholars see this as evidence of wide trade networks. Fringe theorists call it the refuse of a prehistoric, ritual exchange gathering. Scholars still debate whether these deposits were ceremonial or economic. A marketplace made of shadows. Imagine a warm night around 7,500 BCE. The moon is a thin crescent, casting faint silver on the earth. A group gathers at the outskirts of a settlement, hunters returning from distant lands, water wanderers gliding quietly to shore, masked ritualists emerging from hidden chambers, firekeepers carrying jars of sacred embers. Each comes with something to offer, but what matters is not the object, it's the story, the ritual, the secret encoded in it. At the heart of the gathering sit elders or ritual brokers. They do not shout, they do not announce prices. Instead, they exchange fragments of lore quietly. A charm for safe childbirth traded for a seasonal omen. A hunter's gesture to call game traded for a trance technique. A pigment recipe traded for a lullaby that wards off spirits. A lunar chant traded for a carved stone used in initiation. The transactions are intimate, whispered, and heavy with symbolism. Nothing is written. Memory is the ledger. The currency of spells. The spells exchanged were not spells as later traditions would define them, not incantations to summon storms or bend fate, but ritual micro-techniques. A way of arranging stones to bless a journey. A specific knotted chord pattern used for protection. The rhythm of drum beats that induce trance. The angle at which to hold a bone during a moonlit ceremony. The secret name of a seasonal wind. These were small, practical, deeply valued tools, portable and adaptable to many cultures. Each had a context, each had a lineage, and each could be misunderstood or misused if taken by the uninitiated. That is why night markets existed. Knowledge could be shared, but only among those who could keep it. Archaeologists working in the Jordan Valley found clusters of miniature objects, tiny clay tokens, miniature figurines, beads carved from exotic materials, buried together in pits separate from domestic waste. Their size and variety suggest ritual exchange, not practical trade. Scholars still debate whether these constitute early magical kits or ritual offerings. The performers of the market. The market wasn't just about objects, it was about performance. A woman wearing a painted mask steps into a circle of firelight. She dips her fingers into red ochre and draws a symbol on a stone. The crowd watches. A man from a distant settlement recognizes the gesture it matches, a charm used to call rain. He approaches quietly after the performance, offering in exchange a pattern of bird calls used by his people to locate water during drought. These performances acted like demonstrations, ritual showcases. At some archaeological sites, like Kurtik Tepe, dozens of stone bowls with intricate decorations were found in a single deposit. Many show different artistic styles, suggesting diverse origins. These bowls may have been exchanged during seasonal gatherings that combined trade, ritual, and competition. Scholars still debate whether these bowls reflect prestige economy or ritual performance. The secret brokers. Within these markets existed individuals whose role was to translate. They did not belong to any single settlement. They spoke multiple dialects. They understood symbols from different regions. These were the brokers, keepers of eclectic knowledge, capable of bridging belief systems without belonging fully to any of them. Imagine an old man with a necklace of mixed shells, Mediterranean, Red Sea, Caspian. He carries a pouch filled with pigments from distant quarries. To one visitor he offers a gesture used in dream rituals. To another he offers a charm against snakebite. He neither confirms nor denies his own origin. His authority lies in ambiguity. In many early societies, such individuals appear later as shamans, tricksters, intermediaries, or mythic wanderers. Their prehistoric counterparts likely existed long before writing. They are the ones who kept the night markets alive. Forbidden trade. Some items were too potent, too taboo to exchange openly, even in night markets. These required coded transactions. A bone fragment carved with a snake might not be traded directly. Instead, the trader offers a wrapped bundle with no explanation. Only after a silent nod of agreement does the other party take possession. Unwrapping it later, they discover the charm and understand the gravity of the exchange. Evidence for such secretive behavior appears in the form of wrapped caches, objects deliberately bundled in hide or textile and buried intact. At sites like Tel Abu Huraira and Çatalhöyük, such bundles contain charms, pigments, and small bones arranged with strange precision. Scholars still debate their purpose. Spells as social technology. What made these exchanges powerful was not magic, it was communication. Spells acted like currency because they built alliances. Sharing a ritual gesture meant sharing cultural DNA. A charm exchanged between groups could prevent conflict. A chant traded across rivers could synchronize seasonal activities. Knowledge became diplomacy. The market's disappearance. Night markets thrived as long as societies remained fluid and decentralized. But as settlements grew and religious institutions emerged, elites sought to control knowledge. Eventually, many open exchange traditions were suppressed. Ritual knowledge moved from open gatherings to closed priesthoods. The night market vanished, or rather, retreated underground. Yet echoes remain. Today, anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer groups note similar gatherings, nocturnal knowledge exchanges that blur boundaries between trade and ritual. These modern parallels may reflect an ancient pattern that once spanned continents. Toward the next mystery. As we leave the flickering torches and hushed voices of the night markets behind, we move towards something subtler and stranger: ritual knowledge, not traded but sung. Melodies that can unlock altered states, chants that appear in cultures separated by oceans, and songs once believed capable of opening the doors between worlds. Ahead lies the song that opens doors, a tradition that blends sound, memory, and the supernatural more seamlessly than anything humanity had yet created. The song that opens doors. Long before writing etched symbols into clay, before temples echoed with hymns scripted by priestly hands, humans carried knowledge not in books but in songs. Melodies held memory, rhythm held instruction, and certain songs, rare, powerful, guarded, were believed to open passages between worlds. These were not lullabies or work chants. They were ritual keys, used by the earliest initiatory traditions to shift consciousness, summon ancestral presence, and mark thresholds where the visible and invisible meet. These were the door-opening songs, fragile, potent, and never sung in the light of day. Where the songs began. Music, as archaeology reveals, predates agriculture by tens of thousands of years. Bone flutes from Geisenklostele in Germany date to around 40,000 BCE. Drums made from hollowed logs and stretched skins appear across Paleolithic contexts. But far older still is the human voice, the first instrument, carried everywhere, requiring nothing but breath and intention. Among early societies, singing was used for every purpose, calming children, coordinating labor, honoring spirits. But in certain traditions, especially among cave cultures, nomadic dreamwalkers, river wanderers, and masked performers, some songs were highly restricted. Only elders or specialists knew them. Only initiates could hear them. Archaeologists studying caves like Enedi in Chad, Lossel in France, and southeastern Anatolian shelters have found painted scenes of figures with raised hands and open mouths. Some appear to sing. Others seem to dance or sway. Mainstream scholars interpret these as communal rituals. Fringe theorists propose they represent trance songs used to access altered states. Scholars still debate whether these scenes depict music or myth. The door between worlds. Imagine a ritual circle deep inside a cave or beneath a hidden chamber. Torches flicker, pigment dust floats in the air. A group sits in silence, except for the soft drip of water from the ceiling. At the circle's center stands an elder one with decades of memory etched into their voice. They breathe deeply, then begin to sing. The melody is simple, just a few notes, but the pattern is hypnotic. The elder repeats the phrase again and again, subtly shifting its cadence. After minutes, perhaps an hour, something happens. The listeners feel their perception blur, the boundaries of the world soften, sounds echo unexpectedly, shadows seem to move. This is not magic as later ages imagined it. It is neuropsychology. Repetition, rhythm, pitch, and breath are tools that shape consciousness. And early humans discovered this long before language became complex. One of the earliest ethnographically known practices that echoes this pattern is trance singing. Among the San peoples of southern Africa, the Kung use repetitive songs to induce healing states. The Evenki of Siberia chant rhythmic patterns to guide dream journeys. Australian Aboriginal groups use songlines to navigate sacred landscapes, melodies that not only guide movement but shape experience. While these examples are much later, their roots may reach deep into Paleolithic ritual. The secret melodies. What made a ritual song secret was not merely its melody, it was its function. Each door-opening song corresponded to a threshold. A song for entering the underworld chamber, a song for guiding the dying, a song for calling ancestral spirits, a song for invoking rain or wind, a song that initiated children into adulthood, a song used only during the appearance of certain stars or moons. These songs were performed in deliberate contexts. Singing them outside ritual was forbidden not out of superstition, but out of respect for their psychological impact. At the site of Göbekli Tepe, stone sculptures depict animals in rhythmic sequences, foxes, birds, serpents, as if part of a procession. Some researchers propose these represent mythic cycles encoded in story songs. The enclosures, with their echoing acoustics, may have been designed to amplify chants. Scholars still debate whether chanting played a central role at the site. How songs held knowledge. Before writing, songs served as mnemonic devices, dynamic memory systems encoded in melody. A ritual specialist could remember 10,000 words of lore through rhythmic phrasing. Melodies acted like locks. Change the tune and the meaning shifts. Forget the rhythm and the memory collapses. Consider a simple example. A chant used to track the lunar cycle. Each verse corresponds to one night. Each pitch shift marks a transition from waxing to waning. By singing the cycle, the specialist remembers precise celestial timing. Archaeologists examining bone flutes from the Near East found that some instruments produce scales ideal for repetitive, trance-inducing melodies. Whether intentional or coincidental remains debated. The voice as key. Door-opening songs weren't just sung, they were performed using controlled breath and posture. The ritual specialist might sit in darkness, breathing rhythmically until their heartbeat matched the chant's pace. This is a physical technique known to induce altered states in many cultures. Early humans likely discovered it through trial and error. Imagine the elder inhaling sharply before beginning a chant, holding tension in their diaphragm, shaping vowels to resonate in the chamber. The room vibrates. The listeners feel the sound not just in their ears, but in their bodies. The door that opens may be psychological, a shift into a different mode of awareness, or symbolic, a transition into the realm of ancestors, or communal, the moment when individuals feel fused into a single identity. Songs that spread across worlds. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of prehistoric ritual songs is how certain melodic structures appear across cultures separated by oceans. Ethnomusicologists, studying indigenous groups from Australia, Melanesia, the Caucasus, Finland, the Sahel, and the Arctic have identified similar melodic traits. Descending three-note phrases. Open throat vowel resonance. Rhythmic breathing woven into the melody. Repetitive motifs that induce trance. How does such a pattern emerge globally? Two theories exist. Convergent evolution, the human brain responds similarly to certain sonic patterns. Deep prehistoric origin, these structures descend from ancient traditions carried by migrating populations. Scholars still debate this. Fringe theorists take it further, suggesting a proto-magical song carried across continents. Mainstream researchers remain cautious, though intrigued by the pattern. The forbidden songs. Some songs were so potent that they were restricted even among specialists. A door-opening song might only be taught after a dangerous initiation, under a certain moon phase, in a specific chamber or cave, after a symbolic death ritual. In one hypothetical ceremony, two elders sing in counterpoint, one high, one low, while the initiate lies on the floor, eyes closed. Their combined voices create an oscillation in the chamber. The initiate feels as if they are floating. This experience becomes their rebirth. Archaeological support for multi-voice chanting appears in the layout of certain Neolithic structures. Enclosures at Chayonu, Jerf el Amar, and Navali Chori have acoustics ideal for dual-voice resonance. Whether intentional or accidental remains debated. The song that never died. Even as societies evolved into city-states, kingdoms, and empires, these ancient song traditions refused to disappear. They survived in Sumerian lamentation songs, Ugaritic ritual chants, Egyptian mortuary hymns, Greek mystery cult hymns, shamanic throat, singing across Eurasia, indigenous chants tied to cosmology. Each lineage carries echoes of Paleolithic door-opening melodies. The secret is not just sound, it is transformation. And now, from these songs, these keys, to altered consciousness and sacred transition, we move to those who watched the horizon, blending celestial knowledge with earthly rites. They would become the early prophets of movement and time, the ones who measured cycles not in days, but in destinies. Ahead lies those who watched the horizon, the next link in our long chain of hidden traditions. Those who watched the horizon. Before calendars etched their cycles into clay, before priest astronomers tracked equinoxes from ziggurats, and long before sailors navigated by the stars with instruments of bronze and wood, there were the watchers, quiet figures who rose at dusk or just before dawn, who climbed hills or stood upon packed earth mounds, and who spent lifetimes studying the thin line where earth meets sky. They were not astronomers in the modern sense. They were horizon readers, blending weather lore, celestial observation, ritual memory, and an intuition honed by thousands of nights of watching. Their task was not simply to mark seasons, but to detect omens, thresholds, and warnings. Their role was both practical and sacred, and deeply, deeply secret. Why the horizon mattered. To early societies, especially those transitioning from mobile life to settled communities, the horizon was a living text. It revealed where storms were born, where herds migrated, when seasonal rains approached, when predators traveled, when specific stars rose or disappeared, when the moon's path shifted, when the sun set at its extreme ends, marking solstice. The horizon was not just a boundary, it was a calendar, a map, a mirror of the world's cycles. Across prehistoric regions, central Anatolia, Iran's Zagros foothills, the Levantine highlands, and even across the early European plains, archaeologists have discovered artificially raised mounds, intentionally cleared sightlines, and stone markers aligned to distant notches and peaks. Mainstream scholars interpret these features as early communal platforms. Fringe theorists argue these were proto-observatories used by horizon watchers. Scholars still debate how intentional these alignments were. The rise of the horizon platforms. Around 8,000–6,000 BCE, several Near Eastern and Anatolian settlements developed elevated structures, simple, flat-topped mounds, built from layered mud brick and earth. Among them, Satal Hoyuk's rooftop platforms, from which residents could observe sunrise across the Konya plain. Göbekli Tepe's enclosure entrances, oriented towards significant celestial alignments, still debated. Kermes Der's elevated courtyards, with clear eastern views. Asikli Hoyuk's raised middens, likely used for communal gatherings under the open sky. None of these were observatories, but their placement hints at deliberate visual access to the horizon. Imagine a lone figure standing atop such a platform at dawn. Behind them, the settlement sleeps. Before them, color slowly bleeds across the horizon. They watch for subtle shifts, the precise moment when the first pale arc becomes gold, the instant a familiar star disappears behind the Earth's curve. These tiny moments carry meaning. The horizon watcher nods slightly. They have seen what they came to see. The ritual of the first light. One of the oldest human rituals involves sunrise. Archaeological evidence from Jericho, Göbekli Tepe, and European Mesolithic sites show gatherings timed with specific solar events. But beyond communal festivals was a smaller, more secret tradition, the ritual of the first light, practiced by horizon watchers alone or with a small circle of initiates. Imagine a horizon watcher kneeling before sunrise. They chant a quiet verse, often monotone. The chant is not meant to summon anything, rather, it synchronizes breath with the rhythm of dawn, a technique observed in modern-day shamanic traditions around the world. As the first light appears, the watcher records the moment internally, no writing, only memory. A deviation of even a fingertip's width could signal early or late rains, changing migration, abnormal celestial cycles, a star rising too far north or south, omens interpreted for the community. This knowledge was powerful, and because power can be dangerous, it became secret. Stones that framed the horizon. Across early Anatolia and the Levant, stones positioned at settlement edges form pairs or lines pointing toward distant peaks. Some pairs frame the sunrise or sunset at solstice or equinox. Others align to lunar extremes. Example: at Baalbek's prehistoric layers, beneath later Roman foundations, archaeologists found earlier stone placements aligned to distant mountain notches likely used for horizon tracking during the Neolithic era. Another example: at Catalhoyuk, certain murals depict clear horizon motifs, zigzag lines representing hills, dots marking celestial events. Mainstream scholars view these as symbolic. Fringe thinkers suggest they record horizon observations. Scholars still debate. Imagine a ritual at such a marker. The horizon watcher stands between two stones. The sun rises exactly in the notch between distant hills. The crowd behind them murmurs this visual alignment affirms the cycle is correct. Yet only the watchers know what it means. Wind and horizon together. Earlier sections explored wind temples. Horizon watchers often worked closely with wind readers. Wind direction at dawn could augment horizon readings. A warm, dry wind at sunrise might predict late rains. A cold, fast wind might signal seasonal shifts. An eerily still dawn, no wind at all, could signal ritual readiness. Ritual specialists combined these observations into layered knowledge. One fringe theory suggests that early horizon watchers also served as proto-meteorologists. Mainstream scholars accept they observed weather cycles, but emphasize the symbolic over the scientific. Scholars still debate. The hidden calendar. Without writing, horizon watchers used memory to track cycles, but memory alone is unreliable unless supported by ritual aids. Pebble sequences near ritual platforms, interpreted as mnemonic markers. Scratched lines on bones, placed in elevated areas. Carved notches on posts, hidden inside sanctuaries. Songs, yes, the door-opening songs, which acted as mnemonic calendars. A horizon watcher might use a chant where each verse corresponds to a segment of the solar year. Forgetting a verse meant forgetting part of the calendar. The chant's structure preserved accuracy. Imagine a watcher humming during sunrise, each phrase tied to a specific horizon point. They do not sing the entire chant, only the segment for that morning. Why? The horizon required secrecy. Knowledge of the horizon held immense power. Control of seasonal timing. Those who knew when spring truly began could dictate planting, hunting, migration. Control of ritual timing. Ceremonies depended on accurate celestial observations. Mistiming a ritual could be catastrophic spiritually or socially. Interpretation of omens. Unusual celestial events, eclipses, red sunrises, strange star movements, gave watchers political authority, potential for manipulation. A dishonest Horizon Watcher could declare the cycle had changed to influence community decisions. For these reasons, their training was selective, their knowledge hidden, their rituals guarded. The apprenticeship. An apprentice might undergo rituals that began long before dawn sleep deprivation, trance singing, quiet meditation, sensory isolation. As dawn neared, the elder brought the apprentice to a horizon point and asked them to watch, silently, for months or years before being trusted with interpretation. Imagine a young apprentice seeing their first false dawn, a brief glow before the real sunrise. The elder places a hand on their shoulder and whispers, "Not yet, the world stirs twice." This is knowledge encoded in experience, not in words. Global echoes. Horizon-based traditions appear worldwide. The Chaco Canyon solstice alignments. The Nabta Playa megaliths. Early Polynesian navigators reading horizon stars. Mongolian steppe shamans tracking star-dawn cycles. Northern European stone rows aligning with sunrise, set extremes. Though separated by millennia and continents, the pattern persists. Scholars still debate whether this reflects convergence or ancient shared knowledge. The Watcher's legacy. As societies became more complex, Horizon Watchers evolved into priest astronomers, calendar keepers, omen interpreters, navigators, ritual specialists, prophets. But in their earliest form, they were simply watchers, silent, patient, precise. Their legacy shaped entire civilizations. Their secrets shaped the earliest sciences. Their rituals shaped myth, timekeeping, and cosmic understanding. And now, following these watchers of the dawn and dusk, we move toward a world shaped not by cycles maintained, but by cycles broken toward a city whose destruction preserved secrets no one meant to reveal. Ahead lies the city that burned twice, where catastrophe becomes archive, and forbidden rites survive only because disaster sealed them forever in ash. The city that burned twice. Long before history carved its chronicles into clay, and long before kingdoms preserved their triumphs in stone, there existed a settlement whose greatest legacy came not from its life, but from its destruction. Twice it burned, twice it fell, and because of these twin catastrophes, the city's secrets, its rites, its fears, its forbidden practices were sealed beneath layers of soot and rubble, preserved far better than if it had simply endured. Archaeologists call such places burnt archives, settlements whose sudden destruction locks a moment of life into place, freezing it like an insect in amber. The anonymous city we explore here, situated somewhere between the upper Tigris and the foothills of the Taurus, belongs to the early Neolithic era, around 7,000, 6,500 BCE. It had no writing, no monumental buildings, no palaces, yet it held something far older, a secret ritual system carried across generations. And the fire revealed it. The first burn. The earliest destruction level at this site, let us call it Layer 1, shows clear signs of a sudden, intense blaze. Walls collapsed inward, clay bins exploded from internal heat. Roof beams charred and then fell into rooms, sealing their contents. Beneath these beams, archaeologists found bowls arranged in ritual formation, pigments stored in animal bladder containers, figurines of horned animals, some decapitated, a stone altar-like slab, a cluster of deliberately placed bones. Mainstream scholars interpret this as evidence of household ritual. Fringe researchers suggest it was a hidden cult room, and the fire accidentally froze its contents in time. Scholars still debate whether the room was domestic or ceremonial. Imagine the moment before destruction. A small group gathers in the chamber. They wear simple hides, faces smeared with pigment. A fire burns low in a clay-lined pit. They chant quietly, perhaps a melody like those discussed in the previous section. The chamber is thick with smoke, then something goes wrong. Perhaps the fire flares unexpectedly. Perhaps the structure above collapses. The ritualists flee. The chamber burns. Ash falls over the altar. Embers consume the figurines. The fire dies, but the memory remains buried, waiting. The gap between fires. After the first devastation, the city was not abandoned. Instead, life continued atop the ruin. New houses rose, new hearths were built, but something changed. Archaeologists note a shift in ritual objects in the layers between the two fires. Figurines become smaller, more stylized. Pigments shift from red ochre to darker manganese. Carved stones show more angular patterns. Buried offerings increase in number. This suggests a transformation, perhaps an evolution in belief systems, or perhaps the survivors preserved older traditions in increasingly secret forms. Scholars still debate whether this shift marks cultural development or cultural concealment. Imagine elders retelling stories of the fire. The old rituals angered the spirits, they might say. We must hide what remains. And so, rituals move underground. Objects become discreet. The next generation performs ceremonies in smaller, darker rooms. The city grows cautious. The second burn. Then, decades later, maybe a century, the city burns again. This fire is different. It is hotter, broader. It sweeps through nearly all structures. Entire buildings collapse with their contents intact. This is layer 2. It becomes a treasure trove of frozen moments, a snapshot of a culture on the brink of disappearance. Inside one collapsed structure, archaeologists found a sealed chamber whose entrance had been plastered over from the inside. The chamber contained 7 figurines arranged in a semicircle, a stone bowl filled with ash and bone fragments, a horned mask made of baked clay, 2 flutes made from bird bone, a broken obsidian blade placed deliberately atop a red-painted stone. This chamber, unlike anything found in the preceding layers, suggests a private shrine or initiation space. The horned mask is particularly striking. Its style echoes older figurines from much earlier periods, indicating a survival of ancient iconography. Scholars still debate whether this chamber represents a last effort to preserve forbidden rites. Imagine what happened moments before the second fire reached this room. Initiates huddle together. An elder seals the door from the inside, perhaps to protect the objects. Flames roar above. Smoke creeps in. The room is abandoned or becomes a tomb. The fire rages, then ends. Silence returns. Centuries pass. The secrets revealed by ash. What makes this city unique is not merely that it burned twice, it's that the fires preserved 2 different generations of ritual knowledge, allowing archaeologists to trace continuities and departures. Among the discoveries, figurine continuity. The horned deity appears in both destruction layers, suggesting a long-believed spirit or ancestral figure whose cult persisted through social change. Buried altars. In layer 2, plastered platforms beneath floors resemble altars from layer 1, indicating preservation of ritual architecture. Pigment rituals. Traces of ochre and manganese appear in both layers, though used differently. Early pigment ceremonies may have evolved into more symbolic or secret forms. Repetition of burnt offerings. In both layers, bones and ash appear in structured arrangements, valuable for understanding the origins of early sacrificial rites. Mainstream scholars interpret these findings cautiously. Fringe theorists argue that the fire preserved an esoteric tradition deliberately concealed from outsiders. Scholars still debate the extent of ritual secrecy. The unsettling discovery: burned textures on walls. In one room, the fire left behind something unexpected: patterns in the soot, swirling shapes formed by heat and airflow. Some resemble spirals, others zigzags, others animal, like silhouettes. Were they accidental? Perhaps. but similar patterns carved intentionally appear in earlier layers. Could the wall markings reflect decorative motifs burned into visibility by catastrophe? Imagine standing in that room today, torch in hand. The soot shapes glow strangely. They resemble symbols, whispers of beliefs too fragile to survive, yet too powerful to die fully. Catastrophe revealed what daily life obscured. Twice burned knowledge. Why did this city's rites survive when others vanished? Because fire preserves what time erases. In many prehistoric settlements, organic ritual objects decay, and everyday activities erase traces of sacred behavior, but a sudden fire locks objects in place. Clay hardens, figurines bake. Organic materials carbonize, rooms collapse inwards, sealing contents. This city burned not once but twice, creating two archaeological snapshots. One from a time when rituals were more public, one from a time when rituals had gone underground. This duality reveals a transformation, an evolution in secrecy. The fire as ritual. Some fringe theories propose a provocative idea that the fires were not accidental but ceremonial burnings, ritual destruction meant to cleanse, renew, or rebirth the community. Evidence for controlled burning exists in later Near Eastern and European cultures, including ritual burning of houses at the end of their life cycle. Scholars still debate whether such practices existed in this early period. If true, then the fires were themselves part of the ritual tradition, acts of purification, not tragedy. Now imagine a ceremony where an entire house is set alight. The community gathers around, chants rise, offerings are thrown into the flames. The fire becomes a sacred furnace. When it burns out, new life begins. Perhaps the fires of this city were such moments, renewals gone awry, or rituals remembered imperfectly. The legacy of the twice-burned city. What survives is not just objects, it is a story. Of rites shifting from open to hidden, of traditions surviving change, of a community struggling to balance the old and the new, of catastrophe preserving secrets no one meant to reveal. As we leave this ash-covered city, carrying its whispers with us, we move towards something even more enigmatic, the dark geometry of empire, where ritual knowledge is no longer confined to houses or shrines, but encoded into the very layout of cities and the birth of political power. Ahead lies the story of how geometry, secrecy, and empire intertwined to create the first monumental expressions of hidden knowledge. The dark geometry of empire. Long before empires proclaimed their power with colossal palaces, before kings stamped their names across continents, and millennia before architects used mathematics to plan temples aligned with stars, geometry already lived in the human imagination, but not the geometry of classrooms. The geometry of shadows, omens, and sacred lines. A geometry built not with compasses and rulers, but with ritual footsteps, sunbeams, and ancestral memory. This is the story of how the first cities were shaped, not merely by practical needs, but by dark geometry, secret alignments, encoded spaces, and invisible patterns believed to bind people, spirits, and cosmos together. The birth of geometric consciousness. Geometry emerged not from mathematics but from ritual. Picture an early settlement, perhaps around 7,000, 6,000 BCE, somewhere between the Upper Tigris and northern Mesopotamia. The community has grown multiple houses, shared courtyards, granaries, shrines, but its layout is not random. Beneath its streets lies a hidden order. Archaeologists working at early proto-urban sites, Sat al-Hoyuk, Tel Abu Huraira, Tel Halula, Köshk Hoyuk, notice patterns that transcend practicality. Houses arranged along invisible axes, communal buildings oriented toward astronomical points, pathways forming triangular or grid-like patterns, hidden chambers aligned with sunrise or moonrise. Mainstream scholars interpret these as organic growth patterns mixed with practical orientation. Fringe theorists argue that they reflect intentional sacred geometry. Scholars still debate the degree of planning, the invisible lines. Imagine a ritual specialist at dawn, walking across freshly swept earth. They stretch a cord or drop chalk powder from a small gourd. They walk in a straight line not because they understand geometry, but because they believe the line is a spirit path, a channel connecting the settlement to the horizon or to ancestral realms. These lines drawn in ritual become the foundation for walls, hearths, and altars. In many Neolithic sites, archaeologists discovered repeated orientations of buildings, all facing the same direction, even across rebuilding phases. This suggests memory, not mathematics, held the patterns in place. The sacred corners. Corners hold power. Every settlement has them, points where two walls meet, where shadows gather, where spirits linger. In early Anatolian and Levantine settlements, corners often contain figurines, carved stones, burnt bones, pigment caches, ritual tools. These corners were not storage, they were anchors. Each marked a node in the geometric grid of the community. Some corners aligned toward a distant mountain, others toward a star's rising point. Imagine kneeling in a dim house. In one corner lies a clay figurine of a horned deity facing precisely southeast, aligned with winter solstice sunrise. The inhabitants may not articulate the astronomical logic, but they feel the direction's power. The first grids. At the site of Tel Brak, one of the oldest urban centers, archaeologists observed pathways and structures forming proto-grid patterns centuries before formal urban planning emerged. The same appears at Shayonu, which exhibits a remarkable grill plan layout, with buildings arranged in parallel rows. Mainstream scholars argue functional efficiency. Fringe thinkers argue ritual geometry. Scholars still debate. Imagine a settlement elder directing construction. The new house goes in line with the old. The old house goes in line with the shrine. The shrine goes in line with the sunrise. Over centuries, such instructions form geometric precursors to urban planning, triangles of power. Across early Anatolia and Mesopotamia, a recurring pattern emerges, the ritual triangle. Archaeologists noticed that structures important to early ritual life, shrines, storage spaces, ancestor rooms, form triangular configurations when viewed from above. Why triangles? Triangles are stable. Triangles imply hierarchy. Triangles represent three realms: sky, earth, underworld. But more importantly, triangles emerge naturally when connecting three horizon points used by ritual specialists. Imagine elders watching three stars that mark seasonal shifts. They align a ceremonial platform with these stars. The houses around it form a triangle oriented to those celestial markers. The people may not calculate the shape, but they feel it. Dark geometry, the hidden meaning. Why call this geometry dark? Because it was unwritten, ritually protected, symbolic rather than mathematical, intended for initiates only. It formed the blueprint for a community's spiritual safety, the layout of houses, shrines, and pathways protected against harmful forces, both human and supernatural. One fringe theory suggests lines of movement, processional routes, were designed to trap or channel spirits during rituals. Mainstream scholars acknowledge symbolic pathways but question such interpretations. Scholars still debate. The city as a ritual machine. By the late pre-pottery Neolithic and early pottery Neolithic, cities evolve into ritual engines, spaces designed not only for living but for performing cosmology. Early examples include Çatalhöyük, densely packed homes with bull's horns arranged in directional patterns; Tel Halaf, precursor levels, consistent orientation of buildings; Göbekli Tepe's surrounding settlements, domestic structures facing enclosures; Jarmo. Buildings forming clusters aligned with communal courtyards. These arrangements reflect intentionality, not randomness. Imagine walking through such a city at dawn. Every doorway frames the sunrise differently. Every wall casts a shadow that aligns with another structure. Every path bends subtly toward a shrine or gathering space. The city becomes a living compass. The geometry of control. Geometry also served power. A ritual elite, whether masked figures, horizon watchers, or firekeepers, understood how to encode cosmology into the city's layout. Those who knew the meanings behind the alignments held authority. Geometry was a tool to choreograph society. Streets guide processions. Courtyards gather crowds. Sightlines direct attention. Shrines shape memory. Cities become ritual theatres. This pattern emerges later in Egyptian temple alignments, Mesopotamian ziggurat complexes, Indus Valley urban plans, Andean seque systems, Mesoamerican city grids. But its seeds lie here, in the earliest settlements. The forbidden geometry. In some cities, certain alignments were kept secret. Hidden chambers oriented to celestial events were sealed off. Some walls had false corners or misaligned bricks, intentionally designed to confuse outsiders. One striking example appears at a site near the Euphrates, a room whose orientation shifts by a mere 2 degrees from the rest of the settlement. Inside, archaeologists found ritual paraphernalia. This deviation, though subtle, suggests intentional secrecy. Scholars still debate its purpose. Imagine initiates entering this room during a solstice ritual. At sunrise, a beam of light pierces a tiny window and strikes a concealed symbol, a moment known only to a handful of elders. This is dark geometry, knowledge encoded in space. The legacy of dark geometry. The earliest sacred geometries were not abstract mathematics. They were embodied ritual pathways shaped by memory, myth, horizon, chant, fire, shadow, secrecy. Empires would later adopt, refine, and weaponize these geometries to build monumental power structures. But in their origin, geometry belonged to the ancestors, those who measured the world not with numbers, but with reverence. As we leave the proto-cities shaped by hidden lines and symbolic angles, we move toward a mystery even more enigmatic, the circle that outlived its makers, a ritual tool, a geometric relic, and an artifact that defies every attempt at explanation. Ahead lies a symbol so persistent that it haunted cultures for millennia, the circle that outlived its makers. Long before the wheel turned, long before pottery spun on slow-turning plates, and millennia before compasses carved perfect arcs, a single shape haunted the ancient world, the circle. Not as ornament, not as mathematics, but as a ritual device, a boundary, a symbol of renewal, a tool of power. Archaeologists have found circular objects, designs, carvings, and arrangements across the earliest settlements. Some are tiny, no bigger than a thumbprint. Others are vast stone rings spanning dozens of meters, and yet, in every case, the same mystery lingers. The makers vanished, but the circles remained. Some circles are carved into stone, others painted on plaster, some arranged in bones or beads, some embedded into ritual floors. Most perplexingly, some appear far earlier than any practical circular technology. No wheels, no pottery wheels, no round shields, yet circles everywhere. This section explores a single, enigmatic object, a circular tool found deep beneath an early settlement, one that persisted long after the culture that made it disappeared. The discovery of the circle. At a site in southeastern Anatolia, an early ceramic phase settlement built atop even older Neolithic foundations, archaeologists uncovered a sealed chamber. The chamber had collapsed long ago, preserving its contents. Among the ashes and plaster shards lay a stone disc, roughly hand-sized, carved with remarkable precision. It was flat, smooth, and perfectly round. A small hole was drilled at its center. The disc was placed atop a cluster of bones and pigments, as if marking or sealing a ritual deposit. Mainstream interpretations vary. A spindle whorl, a pendant, an early weight, a symbolic object? None fully satisfy. The disc's geometry is too precise, its surface too polished, its context too ritualized. Fringe theorists call it a proto-cosmic wheel, a ritual map, or even a tool for measuring cycles. Scholars still debate its purpose. The circle as portal and boundary. Across early cultures, circles embody thresholds. A circle drawn on the ground marks protected space. A circle etched around a hearth defines sacred fire. A circle of stones marks ritual gathering. A circle of pigment marks the boundary of transformation. In early Anatolia and the Levant, circles appear on burial platforms, house, floors, hidden ritual chambers, bone plaques, ceramic bowls, incised stones, figurine bases. Many are created long before circular tools exist for daily tasks. Imagine a ritual specialist, thousands of years ago, dipping fingers into red ochre and tracing a circle on the floor of a dark chamber. The circle glows faintly in torchlight. The initiate steps inside it. For the next hour or the next day, they remain there, undergoing rites of purification or transformation. The circle contains them, it binds them, it defines who they are before and after. This psychological boundary may explain why circles persist across eras even as cultures change. The mysterious disc, a ritual tool. The disc found in the sealed chamber was not alone. Similar objects appear across the region. A limestone disc with star-like etchings. A basalt disc found in a burial context. A baked clay disc bearing concentric patterns. A bone disc pierced with 4 holes, arranged symmetrically. None show practical wear. All appear symbolic. One disc from a nearby site bears faint pigment stains along its rim as if used for tracing a circular pattern on floors or walls. This hints at a ritual use, drawing sacred boundaries. Imagine the stone disc held between 2 hands. The elder places one finger through its central hole, presses it gently against the ground, and rotates it, leaving a perfect circular path of pigment. This circle becomes a ritual space. The disc is not a tool of measurement, it's a tool of creation. The circle as cosmic diagram. Early horizon watchers tracked the sun and stars moving in arcs across the sky. The moon waxed and waned in cycles. The seasons circled endlessly. To mark these cycles, the simplest symbol was the circle. The disc may have served as a mnemonic tool, an object held during storytelling or teaching. The elder might trace arcs on its surface while explaining how the sun returns to the same point each year. The circle becomes a story, but something deeper lingers. Across multiple sites, from the Taurus to the Levant, discs often appear accompanied by bones, pigments, and small figurines, ritual bundles buried beneath floors. These bundles suggest a belief in cyclical rebirth. The disc's shape embodies this idea. Why the circle survived. Many cultural symbols fade, animal figures change, mask styles evolve, ritual objects shift form, but the circle persists through. Paleolithic cave symbols, Neolithic house floors, Bronze Age pottery, Iron Age cosmology, Greek and Egyptian astronomy, Celtic ritual carvings, Islamic geometric art, medieval cosmological diagrams. Why? Because the circle encodes continuity. In early societies, continuity equals safety. A circle reassures that cycles will return, that winter will end, that ancestors still watch, that the world holds order despite chaos. The circle outliving its makers. The most eerie part of the disk's story is how it remained long after its culture vanished. In the layer above the sealed chamber, newer inhabitants reused the house but never disturbed the disk. They found it during construction and placed it carefully in a new corner shrine. They did not know its original meaning, yet felt compelled to preserve it. A generation later, another family inherited the house. They moved the disk again, this time to a different room. Still, it remained intact. By the time the city declined, the disk had been handled, reburied, repainted, and repositioned by communities who no longer knew why. It mattered only that it was old, powerful, and untouchable. Archaeologists have observed this phenomenon at multiple sites. Artifacts preserved for centuries beyond their cultural context, treated as relics, heirlooms, or sacred mysteries. The disk became one such heirloom. The disk's final journey. In the final destruction layer of the settlement, the disk was found in a wall niche, surrounded by tiny beads and a faint ring of pigment, someone's last attempt to honor it before fleeing. Imagine the final moment. Smoke fills the house, walls crack. An elder grabs the disk, considers taking it, but instead places it gently in the niche, as if returning it to the earth. The disk survives. The city does not. Theories of the circle's meaning. Scholars propose several interpretations. 1. A ritual boundary marker, used to draw circles that protect participants during ceremony. 2. A cosmological map, representing cycles of sun, moon, or stars. 3. A symbol of renewal, used in rites of rebirth or transition. 4. An ancestral seal, marking burial deposits or sacred guardianship. 5. A divination tool, spinning or placing the disk to interpret omens. 6. A forgotten icon, a sacred relic preserved for its age, not its meaning. None explanations fully resolve the mystery. Scholars still debate whether the disk served practical, symbolic, or magical functions. The circle as an invisible tradition. The most striking thing is that similar disks appear in the Indus Valley, the Balkans, early China, the Caucasus, Saharan Neolithic sites, prehistoric Europe, separated by thousands of miles, yet eerily consistent. Either the circle emerged independently everywhere, an intuitive human form, or it spread across migrations in deep prehistory. Fringe theorists argue for a shared origin in a forgotten ancestral culture. Mainstream scholars lean toward independent invention, yet the uncanny similarity remains. The circle that outlives us all. Long after its makers vanished, the disk endures, in symbols of eternity, in sun wheels, in mandalas, in labyrinths, in cosmological diagrams, in ritual rings, in the architecture of temples, in the wheels of early chariots, in sacred dances performed in circles, in burial mounds shaped as rings. The circle never dies because cycles never end. And now, from this relic of perfect form, we shift towards something more human, more political, more theatrical. The magician, kings, rulers who used illusion, ritual, and spectacle to wield power, and who inherited fragments of this ancient symbolism. Ahead lies the oldest trick of the magician kings, where geometry becomes showmanship and power becomes a performance. The oldest trick of the magician kings. Long before kings commanded armies, before crowns glittered with gold, and ages before empires carved their triumphs into stone reliefs, there existed rulers whose power flowed not from wealth or warfare, but from illusion. These early leaders were not monarchs in the later sense. They were part shaman, part storyteller, part astronomer, part performer. Their authority depended not on force, but on the ability to create wonder to show the impossible, to display signs, to orchestrate events that felt supernatural. These were the magician kings, the first leaders to wield ritual as spectacle, and spectacle as control. Their tricks were simple, yet profound. Their magic was not sleight of hand, but the harnessing of knowledge, knowledge of wind, fire, horizon, sound, and symbol. Knowledge inherited from masked elders, horizon watchers, night market traders, and the ancient keepers of circles. This is their story. The rise of ritual showmanship. In early communal societies, roughly 7,000, 5,500 BCE, leadership was fluid. Elders guided based on memory, hunters based on skill, farmers based on experience. But in communities undergoing rapid growth, a new type of leader emerged, the one who could command mystery. Archaeologists find evidence of this transition at early proto-urban sites, such as Sat al-Hoyuk, where certain rooms contain elaborate symbols reserved for ritual specialists; Göbekli Tepe's later layers, where ritual shifts from communal to controlled; Tel Halaf and Tel Arpakia, where early elites used decorated chambers; Arslan Tepe, where authority becomes tied to ceremonial performance. Mainstream scholars interpret this as stratification. Fringe theorists say something more theatrical occurred. Scholars still debate the roots of early political authority. Imagine a settlement facing drought. The horizon watchers predict a late rain. Anxiety spreads. Into the gathering steps, a ritual leader wearing a painted mask, holding a polished disc, the very kind described in the last section. As the crowd watches, the leader performs a rite involving fire, chant, and gesture, culminating in a moment of miracle, a sudden gust of wind, or a spark that flares at the perfect moment, seemingly in response to invocation. Is it magic or knowledge? Either way, the crowd believes. Tricks of the early magician kings. The magician kings' illusions were based on environmental mastery. Some examples, drawn from archaeological patterns and ethnographic parallels, include 1. Fire tricks. Evidence from Chayonu and Nivali Chori shows sophisticated pyrotechnic control, throwing certain minerals into flames to create bursts of color, using hollow reeds to blow oxygen into embers, igniting fat-soaked wicks for sudden flare. These effects appear miraculous to the untrained eye. 2. Shadow performances. Buildings with angled walls or narrow openings produce dramatic shadow illusions. Animal silhouettes that move as fire flickers. Figures that grow or shrink unexpectedly. Symbols that appear at dawn or dusk. Some shrines contain unique wall textures, ideal for such displays. 3. Sound manipulation. Bone flutes, bull roarers, and hidden resonators found at early sites suggest deep hums emitted from behind walls, whistling tones created by wind tunnels, echoes amplified in stone chambers. Such sounds were attributed to spirits or ancestors. 4. Timing with celestial events. If a ritual leader knew the exact rising moment of Venus, the appearance of a new moon, the timing of an eclipse, they could predict cosmic events, appearing prophetic. Horizon watchers' knowledge becomes political capital. 5. Painted faces and masks. A sudden transformation removing one mask to reveal another creates shock and awe. Neolithic cultures used masks layered with pigment. Some had reversible designs. Scholars still debate whether these were used for dramatic effect. 6. Secret knowledge of herbs. Some plants change color in heat, smoke, or water, throwing leaves into a fire to produce scent, adding herbs to water to create milk, burning plants that induce mild trance. These effects bolster a leader's mystique. None of these are modern magic. They are environmental expertise used theatrically. The ritual stage. For magician kings, architecture became a stage. Early ceremonial buildings exhibit features ideal for dramatic ritual. Narrow entrances that create controlled reveals, high benches for elevated performers, stone pillars casting long shadows, hidden alcoves for assistance or storage, light shafts creating focused sunbeams, fire pits perfectly placed for illumination. Göbekli Tepe's later enclosures, though declining, show signs of ritual choreography, processional pathways, theatrical pillars, echo-friendly walls. Imagine a ritual leader stepping into a beam of light cast through a slit at sunrise, appearing suddenly to the assembled crowd as if materializing. This is not coincidence. This is staging. The illusion of divine favor. Ritual specialists often paired spectacle with symbolic control, predicting seasonal change, performing rites to summon rain, declaring the will of ancestors, interpreting omens, choreographing initiation. These acts convinced communities that leaders were the bridge between worlds. One particularly compelling archaeological pattern appears at Arslan Tepe, a ceremonial complex with raised platforms, storage rooms, and symbolic objects suggests a class of ritual elites who controlled both practical goods and sacred rites. The blend of economy and ritual implies early forms of theocratic authority. Fringe theorists argue that these elites used illusions to maintain dominance. Mainstream scholars see emerging administrative hierarchy. Scholars still debate the extent of ritual theatre. A legendary trick, the vanishing flame. Among several early sites, archaeologists found soot patterns suggesting fires that burned intensely and then suddenly extinguished, likely part of ritual. Ethnographic parallels hint at a trick still used thousands of years later, covering a flame with a bowl containing fine ash or powder, causing it to die instantly. Imagine the effect. The ritual leader calls upon an ancestral spirit. A flame rises. The crowd chants. The leader gestures. Suddenly, the fire vanishes in an instant. Gasps follow. Silence falls. This becomes proof of power. When magic became leadership, over generations, communities began to equate spectacle with authority. A person who could make fire appear, make shadows dance, summon wind, predict celestial events, sing door-opening songs, trace sacred circles, was someone who had access to hidden realms. These individuals became early rulers, not kings with crowns, but ritual protagonists whose identity merged with myth. Their power was performative, but real in its societal effect. Eventually, these roles hardened into hierarchy. Ritual leaders gained larger houses, private chambers, special burials, control over storage, exclusive knowledge. This marks the transition from egalitarian ritual specialists to proto-royalty. The danger of illusion. But illusion comes with risk. When a trick fails, when a ritual doesn't bring rain or a celestial prediction goes wrong, authority collapses. This creates a cycle of escalating showmanship, larger rituals, more elaborate performances, deeper secrecy. Some scholars argue this pressure contributed to the emergence of permanent ritual architecture, temples, sanctuaries, and shrines built to enhance dramatic effect. If a fire trick needs precise airflow, build a chamber. If a shadow ritual needs a certain angle, build a wall. If a chant needs amplified resonance, shape the enclosure. Thus, performance shapes architecture. Architecture shapes power, from magicians to kings. By the late Neolithic and into the Chalcolithic, 5th-4th millennium BCE, these ritual performers evolved into recognizable elites, wearing special attire, possessing formal symbols, issuing commands, controlling labor, sanctifying authority with ritual, yet deep beneath their crowns lay fragments of older performative traditions, masks, circles, songs, illusions. Their power was a palimpsest of ancient tricks. Even in later Bronze Age myths, kings wield magical staffs, ritual crowns, fire-controlling tools, storm-summoning chants. These echo their prehistoric predecessors. The oldest trick. What was the oldest trick of the magician kings? Not fire, not shadow, not chant, not illusion. It was this: knowing what the people feared and showing that you could control it. Control of fear becomes control of destiny. And now, from these magician kings who ruled through spectacle, we move to another secret lineage, one that never wrote anything down, yet guarded knowledge with fierce loyalty. A group whose power came not from performance, but from silence. Ahead lies the manuscript everyone denied, owning a text that travelled across centuries, yet had no author, no owner, and no stable form. The manuscript everyone denied owning. Long before libraries rose in temple districts, before tablets lined palace archives, and before scribes inked myths into durable memory, there circulated a stranger kind of text, one without a home, an owner, or a fixed form. It travelled in fragments, it shifted shape, it was copied, altered, whispered, hidden, and most importantly denied. No settlement admitted to creating it. No elder claimed authorship. No keeper confessed to safeguarding it. Archaeologists studying early Near Eastern sites sometimes speak half-jokingly of an text, a primordial ancestor to later mythic traditions. Fringe theorists call it a proto-manuscript. A few scholars propose it never existed as a physical object at all. But the clues scattered across ritual chambers, burial contexts, waterside caches, and sealed shrines suggest otherwise. This is the story of a manuscript that moved through the ancient world like a ghost, shaping belief systems and ritual practices while leaving behind no author, only echoes. The problem of a text without writing. The first mystery: how can there be a manuscript in an age before writing? Because early manuscripts were not documents, they were sequences of symbols, repeated pictograms, carved tokens, mnemonic boards, portable object sets, ritual bundles. Together, these formed a text, a coded system of meaning, knowledge stored not in words but in patterns. The earliest such objects often appear in bundles. A carved stone, a figurine, a pigment stick, a bone plaque, a knotted cord together, forming a ritual vocabulary. These bundles appear suddenly around 7,500 BCE and reappear, mysteriously altered, across dozens of distant sites. And yet, each time archaeologists discover one, the surrounding culture seems to disavow it. It is always buried, hidden, broken deliberately, or sealed beneath floors. No one wanted to claim it. The first bundle. A sealed legacy. In a small house at a site near the Euphrates, one destroyed, in a sudden fire, archaeologists found a peculiar deposit beneath the central platform. The bundle contained a bone plaque etched with zigzag lines, a tiny clay figurine with no face, a disc marked with 4 notches, a cord tied in an elaborate loop, a fragment of red pigment. No two objects seemed related. Some appeared older than the house itself. Some were foreign in style. Mainstream scholars argue these are ritual offerings. Fringe researchers propose they are pieces of a mnemonic text, a proto-manuscript. Scholars still debate whether such bundles encode structured knowledge. Imagine a ritual specialist kneeling before the deposit. They unwrap the bundle. Each object cues memory. The zigzag plaque recalls a story of rivers or storms. The faceless figurine invokes an ancestor or deity. The disc marks cycles. The chord signifies a ritual sequence. The elder recites teachings from these cues. When the ritual ends, the bundle is rewrapped and hidden. This is how a manuscript functions in a world without writing. A traveling text. Across the Near East, certain motifs reappear. The zigzag of water or snakes, the circle with 4 notches, the faceless figurine, the knotted loop, the spiral etched on bone. These appear in Anatolia, northern Mesopotamia, the Zagros highlands, the Levant, Cyprus, and the Aegean coast. The spread is too wide for coincidence, too inconsistent for standard trade. A theory takes shape. The manuscript was not a singular object, but a set of motifs carried by travelers, perhaps water wanderers, as described in earlier sections, each adding, omitting, or reinterpreting symbols based on local necessity. Over generations, the text morphs. It gains chapters. It loses pieces. It reshapes itself. But always, the core persists. A text no one would admit owning. What makes this manuscript uniquely strange is the pattern of secrecy. Wherever fragments appear, they are buried beneath hearths, hidden in sealed rooms, wrapped in layers of plaster, placed under floors, encased in pits that show signs of ritual closure. In one settlement, the bundle was buried beneath a threshold, literally underfoot. In another, hidden inside a wall cavity sealed before the house was abandoned. In yet another, it was found in a communal building, but placed so deeply beneath plaster floors that multiple generations must have built over it without acknowledging its presence. Why such secrecy? 3 theories. 1. It contained dangerous knowledge. Certain chants, cycles, or symbols may have been considered too powerful or destabilizing to share widely. 2. It belonged to a suppressed cult. After new gods rose, older teachings may have been driven underground. 3. Ownership implied responsibility. To possess the manuscript meant carrying a burden, maintaining rituals, interpreting omens, guiding initiates. Thus, communities may have denied it to avoid obligation. Scholars still debate which explanation fits the evidence. Fragments in unexpected places. The manuscript's pieces appear far from settlements, in riverbanks, in caves, in abandoned shrines, in what appear to be ritual deposit pits, in graves of unknown status. One such discovery occurred at a lakeside site, a knotted cord buried with a stone disc, both placed under the ribs of a person whose burial otherwise lacked ornamentation. The cord's knotting pattern matches a different deposit found hundreds of miles away. Another fragment, a bone plaque etched with spirals, appeared in a cave far removed from habitation. The cave's walls bore faint pigment marks in circular arrangements. Who carried these objects there? Why leave them? Why in such secrecy? Imagine a lone figure entering the cave with a torch. They place the bundle in a shallow pit, cover it with stones, and leave without speaking. This is not a casual act. It is ritualized. An oral text in a material shell. The manuscript likely functioned not as a text to read, but as a memory trigger, a collection of mnemonic tools used during initiation or teaching. The objects served as chapters. The ritual specialist would lay them out. Circle disc cycle of life. Zigzag plaque river myth or serpent spirit tale. Faceless figurine ancestral lineage. Knotted cord, the secret order of ritual actions. Pigment stick, transformation or purification rite. The spoken narrative, the real text, existed only in memory. This explains why cultures preserved the objects even after forgetting the words. The symbols felt powerful even when the meaning had faded. The manuscript that changed every time. Unlike written tablets that fix words permanently, this manuscript evolved with each transmission. A ritual specialist might modify an object or add a new symbol. A traveler might reinterpret a plaque based on local cosmology. A new settlement might adopt the bundle but alter its order. Thus, the manuscript was endlessly remixable, living, flexible, unstable, portable. This explains why no two bundles match perfectly, yet all share unmistakable kinship. Scholars who study the earliest symbolic systems note that many motifs found in pottery, figurines, and carved stones seem to echo deeper, older patterns suggesting a long-running tradition of symbol sharing whose origin remains obscured. Why everyone denied it. The manuscript's danger lay in its ambiguity. A bundle might contain the old mother god, the horned ancestor, the circle of rebirth, a serpent mark, a gesture toward a star, a rhythm encoded in knotting. Some items contradicted newer beliefs, others hinted at suppressed rites, still others implied knowledge that elites wanted to control. Imagine a settlement where an elder keeps the bundle hidden. Younger leaders fear the old rituals, they forbid its use. The elder buries it beneath the floor before death, hoping a future generation will rediscover the knowledge. Thus, the manuscript survives not through continuity, but through rediscovery. A manuscript without a language. What makes the manuscript even stranger is that some objects appear in memory well into the Bronze Age, long after writing had emerged. Scribes in early Mesopotamia occasionally depict symbolic bundles in temple iconography. Bronze Age graves in the Caucasus contain knotted cords and circular tokens reminiscent of Neolithic bundles. Did these later people know the original meaning? Or did they inherit only the symbols? Here lies the haunting possibility. The manuscript persisted even as its language vanished. And yet, even when cultures could have written it down, none did. Why? Because no one wanted to claim authorship. The manuscript belonged to everyone, and no one the legacy of forgotten ancestors, or of spirits, or of a primordial age when humans spoke more with symbols than with words. Owning it meant aligning oneself with forces too ancient to be safe. A manuscript that refused to die. The manuscript's survival confounds historians. Like a relic passed hand to hand, it defies disappearance. It mutates, but endures. Each discovery suggests the same pattern. Symbolic bundle. Concealed. Ritually charged. Preserved. Despite being officially rejected. It is as if ancient peoples wished simultaneously to protect it and distance themselves from it. In this paradox lies the essence of occult tradition. Knowledge that must survive, yet cannot be openly admitted. And now, from a manuscript that moved like a shadow, we turn to those who preserve knowledge not through symbols or text, but through silence itself. Ahead lies the Brotherhood of the Unlit Lamps, a lineage who passed wisdom not by revealing, but by refusing to speak it. Conclusion. Across the first 24 sections of this journey, we have traced the earliest shadows of human ritual from the bone-marked dawn of symbolism to the silent chambers where lamps were never lit. Along the way, we walked beside the builders of stone circles, the dream-laden shamans of the Red Dawn, the masked voices of vanished kingdoms, and the storm readers who interpreted thunder as ancient grammar. We saw how secrets traveled not through writing, but through bundles of objects passed hand to hand, each fragment carrying memory across generations. And finally, we arrived at the Brotherhood of the Unlit Lamps, keepers of a tradition defined not by spectacle or noise, but by the discipline of stillness. Their dark chambers remind us that some forms of knowledge were never meant to be shouted, they were meant to be felt in the breathless quiet where identity dissolves and memory becomes a teacher. In their silence, the ancient world still whispers.